Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Jennifer Faith. Jamie and Jennifer Faith were a happy and cheerful couple at the time they met. Jennifer had an 8-year-old daughter named Amber from her first marriage in 2012. Jamie and Jennifer married, and when Amber turned 18, Jamie adopted her. The three lived in Arizona until 2017, when Jamie was promoted and they moved to Dallas. Jamie worked as a manager at American Airlines, while Jennifer, who had a medical degree, worked as a manager at a hospital. On October 9, 2020, an event occurred that forever changed their seemingly happy lives. At 7:30 a.m., Jamie and Jennifer, as usual, took their dog Maggie for a morning walk. A security camera near the front door recorded them leaving. Just a few seconds later, an explosion rang out. An unknown man wearing a blue mask attacked Jamie with a gun. Jamie fell to the ground and died on the spot. The attacker then approached Jennifer, tied her hands with duct tape, and tried to steal her jewelry. Unsuccessful. He jumped into a nearby car and fled the scene. Jennifer was largely uninjured. Her neighbor, Melinda, heard the explosion outside and quickly called 911 to report the situation. When the police arrived, they interviewed Jennifer. She gave a description of the attacker and mentioned that the family had 3 dogs and that they walked them 3 to 4 times a day. The police began canvassing the neighborhood, speaking to residents for potential witnesses. People who knew Jamie Faith described him as a cheerful and kind person, saying he had no enemies. Jennifer's 2 neighbors, Shimona Jackson and his wife, Melissa Gonzalez, said they had known Jennifer's family for years. They maintained good communication and friendship, often inviting each other over to visit. Jennifer even let her neighbors use their backyard pool when she wasn't home. Neighbors described Jennifer as having a great sense of humor, noting that they never heard her swear or raise her voice. They also observed that Jamie and Jennifer had a loving relationship and rarely argued. A neighbor shared a surveillance video that captured a man wearing a blue mask just before he began attacking Jamie. Other cameras captured the suspect fleeing from a vehicle identified as a black Nissan Titan pickup, although the camera failed to record the license plate. The police did notice a key detail. There was a white letter T on the rear driver's side window. This provided the police with a valuable lead after her husband's death. Jennifer received an outpouring of sympathy, with even strangers offering to help. A local women's club, supported by the church, has been providing free meals for Jennifer and her daughter for weeks. Jennifer requested vegan meals. A fundraising page was set up on a charity website to seek financial help for Jennifer and her children during this difficult time. In a short period, she raised about $60. Jennifer organized 2 funerals for her husband, one in Dallas and one in Phoenix. In December 2020, 2 months after her husband's death, she gave a brief interview to a local television station, overwhelmed with grief. Jennifer urged the police and the public to find the person responsible for her husband's death. She expressed hope that the perpetrator would eventually understand the severity of their actions and come forward. The police are actively investigating the case. Examining Jennifer's background and her cell phone, they found a text message from April 2020, 6 months before the tragedy, in which Jennifer told a friend that she was rekindling her relationship with her ex-boyfriend, Darren. The police also discovered a contact number for Darren Lopez on Jennifer's phone. It was clear that Jennifer and Darren had known each other since high school and had started dating again in early 2020. Darren, 49, is a retired veteran who suffered a traumatic brain injury while serving in Iraq and is currently receiving disability benefits. He also struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder, which leads to frequent bouts of anger. Since 2015, Darren has lived in Tennessee with his wife and 3 daughters. In December 2019, his wife filed for divorce, leaving Darren feeling depressed. He was struggling financially, dealing with multiple loans and debts, and worried about losing his home in the impending divorce. To cope, Darren began reconnecting with old friends on social media One of the first people he contacted was Jennifer Faith, an old girlfriend from high school and college, in 2020. They rekindled their romance through correspondence. Police discovered that Darren owned a 20-acre lot in Tennessee and a black Nissan Titan pickup truck, which matched the vehicle used by the suspect who fled the crime scene. Dallas police shared this information with the Tennessee police, who then set up aerial surveillance of Darren's home. They spotted a black Nissan Titan pickup truck with a white T sticker on the rear driver's side window. Police did not immediately arrest or question Darren. Instead, they continued to monitor him to gather more information. They checked his background, financial records, transactions, and phone logs. Police discovered that Darren had been in frequent contact with Jennifer, sometimes sending as many as 500 text messages a day. However, starting around noon on October 8, the day before Jamie died, Jennifer stopped all contact for about 28 hours. During this time, Darren told his daughters that he was leaving town to go hunting for a few days. Bank card records show that he went to a gas station near his home before heading to Jennifer's house. Surveillance cameras captured Darren at a convenience store and gas station on his way to Jennifer's house. Footage from a gas station in Arkansas showed him wearing a blue mask. The next day, at 2 a.m., GPS data indicated that Darren went to Jennifer's house. He was also seen on surveillance cameras at a vacant house next door, where he stayed for about 5 hours until 7:30 a.m., when Jamie went out to walk her dog and was murdered. After the incident, he drove back to Tennessee on January 11, 2021, 3 months after the murder. Darren was arrested while walking his dog near his home. He appeared nervous and denied any involvement in Jamie Faith's death. However, police found a blue mask in his pickup truck. He was taken to a local jail, and during a search of his home, officers discovered a .45 caliber handgun, which was the weapon used to kill Faith. They also found Jennifer's credit card. Darren Lopez was charged with the murder of Jamie Faith and was transferred to the Dallas County Jail. Police decided to check on Jennifer, who was unaware that Darren had been arrested. During questioning, Jennifer denied having a romantic relationship with Darren, but admitted that they communicated daily. Over the past 6 months, they had exchanged approximately 116 text messages, indicating that they communicated almost constantly to keep their interactions secret from her husband. Jennifer deleted all text messages and calls from her phone, but some messages remained. Their conversations covered a wide range of topics. Police soon discovered that Jennifer had sent Darren a text message asking him to remove the T sticker from the back window of his pickup truck. Darren later responded he had removed it 2 months after Jamie's death. Jennifer informed Darren that she had not received the $629 life insurance payout for Jamie. She explained to Darren that they had not yet reviewed her claim because the police had said she was a suspect. Jennifer then called the police to express her frustration at not being informed about the investigation and for not being removed from the suspect list. Meanwhile, she continued to communicate with Darren and began supporting him financially by sending him money and expensive gifts. After her husband's death, Jennifer also created a profile on a charity website seeking financial support for herself and her daughter. She raised $60 and spent it all within 2 months. Police tracked her finances and discovered that she had wired money to Darren, paid for his plane tickets, and allowed him to use her credit cards. Jennifer did her best to support Darren even after his arrest. She continued to express her love for him and pledged to always be there for him, no matter the circumstances. On February 24, 2021, Jennifer was arrested and charged with obstruction of justice in connection with her husband Jamie Faith's case. She was taken to the Dallas County Jail, where she pleaded not guilty. At this point, she was no longer able to interfere with the investigation or delete messages from her devices. Police searched Jennifer's home and seized her computer, where they discovered a series of emails sent from Jamie's account. The emails contained detailed accounts of Jamie abusing Jennifer. Some of these messages included photos showing her bruises and injuries. However, What surprised the police was that these emails continued to be sent to Darren. Police soon discovered that these emails were part of a carefully planned plot. Jennifer had created fake emails to make people think that she was being abused by her husband. She sent these messages to Darren to convince him of her plight. She also fabricated another email that appeared to be from a friend who claimed to know about Jennifer's abuse and urged Darren to help her. Upon learning of these emails, Darren decided to rescue Jennifer in September 2021, 7 months after her arrest. Jennifer was charged in connection with the death of her husband Jamie and faced the death penalty. What made Jennifer want her husband dead? On the surface, she seemed to have the perfect life, a loving husband who provided financial security and a comfortable home for her. On February 7, 2022, Jennifer Faith appeared in court and admitted to deceiving Darren Lopez by sending him emails from her late husband's account to manipulate him. In exchange for Jennifer's guilty plea, prosecutors agreed not to seek the death penalty for her. Jamie's relatives did not attend the hearing. The family home was sold, and daughter Amber, along with the dog Maggie, moved out of Texas. Amber maintained contact with her mother, calling her twice a week. After Jennifer's confession, Darren forward and admitted that he was the one who killed Jennifer's husband, Jamie. He explained that he had a good family, but after returning from Iraq, he began communicating with Jennifer, which ultimately led to the tragic incident. Jennifer and Darren dated in high school, but broke up. They rekindled their romance in 2020. Communicating mostly over the phone without ever meeting in person, Darren revealed that the decision to deal with Jamie was actually Jennifer's idea, and he felt manipulated by her. On June 21, 2022, Jennifer Faith was convicted of murdering Jamie Faith and sentenced to life in prison. She was also ordered to pay $6.5 for Jamie's funeral expenses and a $250 fine. Meanwhile, the fundraising campaign to support Jennifer Faith's family returned all of the money to the original donors. Darren Lopez confessed to killing Jamie Faith. He was convicted at trial and sentenced to 62 years in prison. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Martin McNeil. Michelle Marie Summers, a well-beauty queen and part-time model from California. She had always cherished two things, her family and God. At 21, she met Martin, a 22-year-old man, at an event for Mormon singles. Michelle believed he was the man of her dreams, but her parents did not agree with that. They disapproved of his bold, abrasive personality and felt uneasy around him, wishing that their beloved daughter would not date him. Like Romeo and Juliet, her parents' disapproval only made Michelle find her relationship with Martin more attractive. While her parents saw Martin as a narcissist, she believed he was an ambitious man who had overcome a difficult childhood. When he threatened to end his life if she left him, she agreed to marry him. Then, they eloped and secretly wed in 1978. Their honeymoon was short-lived. Within 6 months of their marriage, Martin was sent to prison, leaving Michelle to spend most of her time alone. Before meeting her, he had forged checks totaling $35,000. In addition to typical items like jewelry and clothing, he bought a grandfather clock, 60 pairs of socks, a refrigerator, and strangest of all, he bought enough chocolate-covered cherries to last a year. He got the idea for check forgery from a TV program about check fraud, which claimed it could be done in 60 minutes. Martin thought he could do it even faster. Sadly, forging checks was just one of Martin's many lies. He almost completely made up the story of his life. He had ambitious plans for his future, despite a difficult childhood. While many young men pick up the guitar to join rock bands and impress women, he chose a different route. He aimed to gain wealth and recognition by becoming a doctor. However, his poor academic record posed an obstacle to his dreams. Undeterred, Martin applied his usual tactic, which was to lie. He first used a fake certificate to enroll in a medical college in Mexico. After studying there for 6 months, he forged more certificates and was accepted into a medical university in California. His plan worked, and in 1984, he officially became a doctor. By that time, he had also taken note of the many attractive women among his patients. Later, when Martin realized the respect people had for lawyers, he decided he wanted a law degree as well. Once again, he pursued this goal dishonestly. While working at the Brigham Young University Clinic, he falsified his application to gain admission to the university's law school. He has been a chiropractor for many years, but if his fake qualifications are exposed, he would have faced severe criminal charges. In 1990, he was caught committing fraud and was banned from writing medical bills for 12 years. In 1998, Martin was expelled from the medical center following allegations of sexual harassment, inappropriate behavior, and incompetence as a doctor. However, this did not deter him. In 2000, the governor of Utah appointed he as the chief physician at the Utah State Development Center. On the surface, he appeared composed and normal, but a closer look revealed otherwise. For example, he frequently threatened to end his life. However, whenever someone criticized his actions, he used this threat. In 1994, after being discovered having an affair with one of his patients, Martin threatened to end his own life. In 2000, after his wife, Michelle, discovered he was watching pornography, he threatened to kill her with a meat cleaver. His 14-year-old son had to intervene and take the knife away. 5 years later, he was caught again watching explicit films and once again threatened to end his life. It was also revealed that Martin had multiple relationships with women across the country. 2 of these women, Anna Osborne and Gypsy Willis, were more than just casual lovers. Anna owned a laser appeal clinic and met Martin in 2005 while he was working as a consultant. At the time, Anna was facing a difficult divorce, and Martin offered to act as a mediator between her and her husband. The reason is that he has specialized training in the field of lawyers. After that, Martin and Anna's relationship quickly became intimate. In conversations, he often bragged that with just the right combination of drugs, he could kill people easily, making death look natural, like a heart attack. He even suggested to Anna that she should kill her husband, but she initially thought that he was only joking. As for Gypsy Willis, she is Martin's true love. They met online in November 2005. Martin presented himself as a doctor and lawyer, he impressing she with his intelligence and charm. At the time, Gypsy was a 29-year-old nursing student. He gradually realized that without she, his life would not be perfect. Until then, he thought he had successfully balanced his double life, keeping his affair hidden from both sides. But he was mistaken. In February 2007, Michelle grew suspicious. She noticed Martin behaving oddly and decided to check his phone records. She repeatedly saw Gypsy's name and number. So she confronted he about the affair. He admitted to it and promised to end the relationship with Gypsy on one condition: Michelle had to work on herself, specifically her appearance. He asked her to have a facelift. At first, she was hesitant. She felt she needed to prepare for the surgery, as she had high blood pressure and wanted to address that first. However, he reassured her that everything would be fine. Reluctantly, she agreed, hoping the facelift might improve their marriage. Then, they met the surgeon, who would perform the surgery. Just moments before Michelle was put under anesthesia, Martin pulled the doctor aside and handed him a detailed list of medications to prescribe. He assured the doctor that he would personally oversee Michelle's recovery. Trusting Martin's medical expertise, the surgeon agreed without any hesitation. The operation was a success, and the doctor prescribed the medications as Martin had requested. However, these medications were dangerous when combined. The doctor assuming Martin would manage them properly, so he has no reason to worry. On April 3, 2007, Martin brought Michelle home from the hospital. She was heavily sedated, her eye was bandaged, and Martin took care of her. Their eldest daughter, 22 years old Alexis McNeil, was studying to become a doctor, following in her father's footsteps. On April 10, 2007, she returned home for the holidays and to care for her mother, Michelle, who was recovering from surgery. She immediately noticed that her mother looked unwell and wanted to help. But Martin refused to let her. He asked Alexis to leave the bedroom, insisting that he would take care of Michelle himself. The next morning, Alexis found her mother in a state of exhaustion, lethargic like a zombie. She confronted her father, Martin, and he admitted he might have given Michelle too many pills. He explained that Michelle had vomited, so he gave her additional doses. Shocked that her father, a doctor, was mishandling her mother's medication, she insisted on taking over the responsibility of administering the pills. In private, Michelle confided in Alexis, asking to touch each pill before taking it. With her vision obscured by bandages, she relied on the unique markings on the pills to identify them. Michelle revealed she didn't trust Martin, believing he was up to something sinister. She even pulled Alexis close and said that if anything happened to her, Martin will be the one to take responsibility. Michelle recovered quickly, allowing Alexis to rest and continue her studies in medical school. The last time she spoke to Michelle on the phone was at 8:45 a.m. on April 11, 2007. When Alexis asked Michelle how she felt about Martin, Michelle responded happily, saying he was sweet and loving. She reassured Alexis there was nothing to worry about. However, Alexis unable to shake a sense of foreboding that something was wrong. During the morning of April 11, 2007, Martin left for work as usual. He then picked up his youngest daughter, Ada, from school at around 11:35 a.m. When they got home, he told Ada to go find her mother, Michelle, while he started preparing dinner in the kitchen. Little girl ran through the house calling out for her mom, but received no response. Eventually, she checked their bedroom, but her mother wasn't there. Thinking her mom might be taking a bath, little girl headed to the bathroom. She stumbled upon a horrifying scene that would haunt her forever. She found her mother, fully clothed, lying face down in the bathtub. The water had turned a reddish-brown color. Shocked and terrified, she screamed and called for her father, Martin. When he arrived, he told Ada to go get help from a neighbor, while he worked to get Michelle out of the tub. Then, Martin made a series of calls to 911. Some calls were abruptly disconnected, while in others, he claimed to be a doctor performing CPR on his wife, only to hang up again. These unusual behaviors prompted the 911 dispatcher to keep recordings. Shortly after the discovery of Michelle's body, Martin's son Damien and Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, arrived at the house. Martin speculated that Michelle might have overdosed on medication and passed out in the tub. However, instead of checking the medication himself, he insisted that Eileen flush the pills down the toilet and dispose of the packaging. The medical examiner concluded that Michelle had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. On the afternoon of April 11, 2007, Alexis received a strange message from her father, Martin. He mentioned that Michelle wasn't getting out of bed and asked Alexis to call her. When Alexis tried, Martin answered and said that Michelle was now in the bathroom, not breathing, and that he had called an ambulance. He then hung up abruptly, without waiting for her reaction. Alexis, one of the last people to learn about her mother's passing, hurried to Utah. She was deeply saddened by her mother's sudden passing, and she suspected that her father might be responsible. Her first reaction was to check how much medicine her mother had left, as she knew how many pills her mother had taken and how many should remain. However, Damien's girlfriend, Eileen, had thrown the pills away before she could check. The medical examiner concluded that Michelle had died from a heart attack, and police reports classified her death as unnatural. However, Alexis suspects that her father, Martin, is responsible for her mother's death. She confided everything to her older sister, Rachel, but no one wanted to believe that their father could harm their mother. Martin enjoyed taking risks and pushing boundaries. However, when he told his daughters to go to church and pray for God to send them a new nanny to care for the younger children, he crossed a line. Their mother had been buried only 3 days earlier, but the daughters obeyed their father and went to meet the nanny. The woman introduced herself, and Martin acted as though he was meeting her for the first time. In truth, he knew her very well. She was his mistress, Gypsy. She introduced herself as Jillian, but Alexis immediately recognized her as Gypsy Willis. Alexis warned her father, Martin, not to bring Gypsy into their home, but he ignored her. Less than a month after Michelle's funeral, Gypsy moved in with he. She didn't behave like a nanny at all. She didn't care for the children, clean, cook, or do any household tasks. Instead, she spent every night in Martin's bed. Rachel and Alexis questioned their father, Martin, demanding to know why this so-called nanny wasn't doing her job. However, he threatened to kick them out of the house if they didn't treat Gypsy well. With the help of their aunt, Michelle's sister, Rachel and Alexis cooperated with the police to investigate their mother's death. Meanwhile, Martin was scheming again. Gypsy is in debt, and Martin came up with a plan to solve it. He told her that creditors wouldn't be able to find her if she changed her identity, and he found a way to make it happen. Martin adopted a 16-year-old girl named Giselle, then sent her back to her biological family in Ukraine so Gypsy could steal her name and social security number. Then, he told Giselle that he would adopt her in the summer, but she never heard from him again. When Martin returned to Utah, he found a new home for his 3 other adopted daughters. A year later, Giselle's cousin, Gil, visited to check on her well-being. Upon arriving, Gil discovered that Giselle was living in extreme poverty with her biological family. Meanwhile, in the United States, Gypsy was living a comfortable life under Giselle's identity. Martin even altered his will, leaving everything to Gypsy. At times, he referred to Gypsy as his wife, while at other times, he claimed she was his daughter. When Gil brought the real Giselle back from Ukraine, Martin and Gypsy's fraudulent scheme involving fake documents was immediately exposed. In 2009, both pleaded guilty to federal charges and served time in separate prisons. While he was incarcerated, Rachel and Alexis tried to produce evidence of his involvement in the death of their mother, Michelle. The chief medical examiner agreed to review Michelle's toxicology report. Although each drug in her body is not toxic when taken individually, their combination can lead to death. The examiner also concluded that Michelle could not have taken the drugs on her own. As Rachel and Alexis investigated further, they uncovered the extent of Martin's lies. They discovered that his entire career was built on forged credentials. Adding to the scandal, Martin was still collecting disability payments from a brief stint in the military. Martin completed his prison sentence for fraud, forgery, and identity theft in July 2012. Perhaps he had plans to change himself, maybe become an astronaut, a nuclear physicist, or whatever his imagination could come up with. But he never got the chance. In August 2012, he was officially charged with the murder of Michelle. Tragically, Damien, one of Michelle's children, wasn't there to support Rachel and Alexis during this time. A few years after Michelle's death ended his life. Rachel and Alexis testified against their father, Martin, thereby exposing all of his lies and fraud. It also came to light that he had begun sexually assaulting Alexis just 6 weeks after Michelle's murder. He was convicted of this assault in a separate trial. Years after Michelle's death, her family finally uncovered the truth they had been seeking. Martin had drugged Michelle with substances that were nearly undetectable, then left for work to establish his alibi. In 2013, Martin McNeil, was found guilty of murder and sentenced. As for Gypsy, she was only charged with identity theft and has maintained a low profile since the trial. Michelle and Martin's daughters are determined to completely eliminate their father's negative influence and figure from their lives. Alexis got married and adopted her 3 younger sisters. She also changed her last name from McNeil to Summers, her mother's maiden name. Alexis explained that she didn't want to be Dr. McNeil. She wanted nothing to do with her father. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Nancy DePriest. In February 1998, a visitor arrived at the office of the current governor of Texas. The visitor was a criminal who wanted to confess and cleanse his soul. He began writing letters to the police and the prosecutor's office, attempting to reach out to them for 2 years starting in 1996, but all his attempts were ignored. Eventually, he decided to write directly to the governor. In his letter, he confessed to a crime far more serious than robbery or rape. Over 4 pages, he detailed the murder of a girl named Nancy DePriest, which he had committed in 1988. He urged the governor to take his confession seriously, stating that he had become religious and wanted to confess. 2 men had already been imprisoned based on statements related to a crime they did not commit. Both were falsely accused and unjustly convicted. During the investigation, it came to light that 2 young men had admitted to the murder, while the true killer felt remorse for ruining their lives. He believed that the wrongful convictions were a result of police pressure, which he managed to evade. In 1998, this criminal wrote another letter to the prosecutor's office, confessing to the murder of a young girl and providing numerous details that only the actual murderer would know. The letter caught the attention of the governor, leading to the reopening of the case files to investigate the man's claims, as his conscience began to weigh heavily on him. Police started to re-examine all the case materials and discovered many inconsistencies. The story of the murder began in the year of 1988. On the morning of October 24th, around 9:30 a.m., the administrator arrived on Rent Street in Austin, Texas, to check on her employee, Nancy, who had not answered the phone. Nancy was a manager and was supposed to arrive early to prepare the food. Her husband drove her to the restaurant that day at 7:40 a.m. before going to work. According to the restaurant's schedule, Nancy's last contact with the owner was at 8:30 a.m., when she placed an order for ingredients that were running low. However, when the owner called Nancy at 9 a.m. to check if they were ready to open, Nancy did not answer. Her attempts to call back were met with silence. Worried, the owner decided to go to the restaurant, where she found the back door unlocked, water spilled on the floor, and the mixer running. Everything was eerily quiet, and Nancy was nowhere to be seen. The restaurant owner continued to search and found Nancy in the bathroom, surrounded by her own blood. Her head was severely injured, her eyes were glassy and unfocused. Fortunately, she was still alive, but her wrists were tied with her own bra. Panicked, the restaurant owner immediately called an ambulance. The ambulance arrived, found Nancy alive, and rushed her to the hospital, where doctors did everything they could to save her. Unfortunately, her injuries were too severe to save her. After discussing her condition with the doctors, Nancy's family made the heartbreaking decision to remove her life support. They chose to donate her organs, believing that Nancy would support this choice, ultimately helping to save the lives of many others. Forensic experts found that Nancy had been violently raped before she was shot in the back of the head. DNA evidence was collected from the crime scene and sent to the lab for analysis. The lead police believed that the motive for her murder was robbery, as the cash register from the day before was missing. A year earlier, multiple pizzerias in the Austin area had been robbed, but those incidents happened late at night or after closing hours, and there were no injuries, rapes, or murders. The thieves focused solely on stealing cash from the registers and the business's earnings. Nancy's murder was markedly different from previous robberies in the city. The police discovered multiple hair samples throughout the crime scene, including behind the counter and in the restroom. Her clothing was found in the sink of the women's restroom, indicating a struggle had occurred. The police considered 3 possible scenarios. First, Nancy might have forgotten to lock the front doors. Second, she could have known the perpetrator and willingly let him in. Third, he might have had access to the establishment and possessed his own key. Rumors about the murder of the pizza shop employee spread quickly throughout Austin, particularly affecting other Pizza Hut locations in the area. All employees were warned about the potential danger. This horrific incident shocked the community, from the victim's family to all Austin residents. Everyone was desperate to know who could harm Nancy, and the public urged the police to apprehend this perpetrator swiftly. Police investigated whether Nancy had any enemies. However, at just 20 years old, Nancy had no known connections to criminals and had never been in trouble with the law. She was a kind, well-liked person from Fort Worth, Texas, and well-known to the locals. No one expected her to be the victim of such violence. Just before the tragedy, Nancy had been married to Todd DePriest, who worked for the United States Air Force. At the time of her death in July 1987, the couple had a daughter, Sylvia. The employees at the restaurant where Nancy worked were stunned by her murder. They described her as a kind and friendly young woman who was happily married and deeply loved her family, including her husband and daughter. As a manager, Nancy was well respected by her colleagues, who viewed her more as a friend or sister. There were no complaints about her work ethic or leadership. Police first investigated the possibility that the attacker had a key to the restaurant. This led them to consider current and former employees, as all the pizza parlors in the chain had the same key system. This greatly expanded the pool of potential suspects. Police focused on the restaurant owner who discovered Nancy's body, but eventually discovered that everyone had an alibi and that there were no suspicious individuals among the employees. The main suspect initially considered was Nancy's husband Todd, but he had a solid alibi. After dropping Nancy off at work, he went directly to his own job, which ruled him out as a suspect. This left police puzzled about who could have attacked Nancy. Her family insisted she would never open the door to a stranger and always kept her doors locked, suggesting that the attacker was someone she knew. The police faced growing pressure from the local community, which was flooded with complaints and demands for a swift resolution. The public's fear heightened, particularly on November 9th, 2 weeks after the incident, when the restaurant on Rynn Street reopened. Pizza Hut's management instructed employees to monitor customers closely and to report any suspicious behavior immediately. On the same day, restaurant employees contacted the police to report 2 suspicious individuals. It turned out that these men were Christopher Ochoa, 22, and Richard Danziger, 19, who were employees of Pizza Hut at different locations. The security guard noted that they arrived in a car, parked in the lot, sat in a vehicle for a while, and then came inside to order beer. The 2 young men barely spoke and seemed to be examining the pizzeria suspiciously. When the security guard approached them, he was disturbed by their comments about the murder of Nancy. Christopher and Richard asked if there were any suspects in the case and questioned why there was no security present during the incident. The security guard then asked Richard where he was at the time of the crime, and he replied that he had been working at a different Pizza Hut that morning. Richard believes that there are multiple people involved in the case. The 2 men then raised their beer bottles in a toast, which seems odd to the security guard. The security guard then informs his colleagues of this unusual behavior, prompting them to contact the police with their suspicions. The police quickly identify the young men and check their alibis, which are confirmed. They could not have been at the pizza parlor where Nancy worked that morning. The conversation between the young men and the security guard is also revealing. It is possible that the young men were simply afraid for their safety, as they worked at similar establishments, which prompted them to discuss their concerns with the security guard. However, Christopher and Richard were immediately considered the prime suspects. This was likely due to public pressure and the lack of other suspects for the police. They were well suited to the role of the criminals, as they were likely acquaintances of the girls. They also had keys to the restaurant and had a reputation as good people. They did well in college and worked in a pizza parlor to support themselves, so their loved ones refused to believe that they were involved in the murders. A police officer, Sergeant Hector Palenka, joined the investigation. Hector had actually solved all of his cases. However, there were rumors that he could be less than professional and abused his position. Some claimed that he was willing to use the most extreme measures to obtain confessions. According to rumors, Hector repeatedly beat suspects to obtain confessions. While talking to Hector, Richard revealed that he had heard from coworkers that Nancy was shot in the back of the head with a .2 pistol. He also mentioned that there was a girl's blue apron in the sink, which was blocking the drain and causing the restaurant to flood. Although this information spread quickly among the staff, the police officer found it highly significant. From that point on, the officer became convinced that Richard was the murderer. Hector thought that only the killer would know specific details, like the color of the apron, ignoring that all the staff wore the same uniform. However, aside from his suspicions, the police had no real evidence against Richard. Colleagues verified that Richard was working the morning of the murder, so he was soon released despite the suspicions against him. The police met Christopher at a pizza parlor in another part of town and then brought him to the station to discuss the case. Unlike the previous suspect, Christopher faced a much harsher situation. He was interrogated for hours using aggressive tactics. The officers attempted to intimidate him several times and warned him of the possibility of physical harm and the death penalty, which is legal in Texas. During the interrogation, Christopher cried and tried to prove his innocence, but this only seemed to strengthen the officers' resolve. Despite the intense pressure, the boy maintained his innocence and denied any involvement in the crime. The officers threatened to imprison Christopher with the most violent inmates at the Palenka institution, implying he would face sexual violence if he did not confess. In desperation, Christopher asked what he needed to do to avoid this fate. The police insisted that he admit guilt. Overwhelmed by fear and exhaustion, Christopher falsely confessed that his friend Richard had committed murder. The police recorded his statement. Afterward, Christopher was not allowed to leave. He wanted to go home, but instead, he was taken to the hospital for hair, blood, and other sample collections. Then, he was informed that he couldn't be released because he had signed a statement against Richard and was at risk. Christopher was placed in a hotel and was not allowed to leave his room. The next day, he was brought back to the police station, where they stated that they were certain he was involved in Nancy's murder. He was not a witness, but an accomplice. The nightmare begins again. This time, the police demand a confession from Christopher. He is forced to confess on tape. He repeats the story against his friend, which he was beaten into lying about during the first interrogation. Now, the police force him to say that at the time of the attack, he was also near the Pizza Hut where Nancy worked and was waiting in his friend's car. Of course, they are talking about Richard, who allegedly raped the girl, shot her, and stole the money. Christopher is denied a lawyer during the second interrogation. He has not eaten, drank, or slept properly for days. However, even at this stage, they force him to take a lie detector test. He is forced to answer yes or no questions, not knowing that it is all a scam. As a result of this test, the police falsely accused him of failing a polygraph test in order to further threaten him. Next, the police asserted that they believed he was still in the pizzeria during the massacre and actively participated in the crime. They alleged that the reason for the polygraph test was to prove that Richard was the mastermind behind the crime and that Christopher was his accomplice. Despite the police's insistence on his guilt, Christopher maintained his innocence. They then proposed a deal. If he revealed the truth about what happened, he would serve 60 years in prison instead of facing the death penalty. Additionally, Christopher was promised that if he behaved well in prison, he could eventually be released early. However, if he refused to cooperate, he would face the death penalty. Christopher's answers were recorded on a tape recorder. The police focused on getting a statement that suited their needs. They asked Christopher suggestive questions, suggesting how he should answer. During this time, the recording paused. Then, Officer Hector gave Christopher the answer he wanted and the recording continued. This process took a long time, and the exhausted Christopher continued to resist, although weakly, because he was mentally and physically exhausted. The police became angry and threw a chair against the wall. Hector decided to repeat a tactic he had used just a few days earlier. At that time, Hector brought a typewriter and typed up the statement needed to close the case. Christopher simply signed it. After a few hours, Christopher was taken to the county jail. Over the past 24 hours, he had been interrogated for over 20 hours and spent a week in solitary confinement. In reality, he was being held against his will in a hotel room. Somehow, the purported confession made its way to the police. Although it was clearly false, Christopher signed it, allowing the court to use it as a full confession to Nancy's murder. The document claimed that at approximately 7 a.m., Richard and Christopher went to the Pizza Hut. They had a .22 caliber pistol and used a key to enter the restaurant without any trouble. They found Nancy inside alone, tied her up, and attacked her several times. She was then shot once in the back of the head. Before leaving, they turned on the water to flood the restaurant and destroy the evidence. The day after his forced confession, on November 15th, Richard was arrested while visiting relatives. He was charged with murder and faced the death penalty. After his arrest, the police informed him that they had solved a brutal crime, claiming that the public could now feel safe. Police Hector and others pressured Christopher to give a statement, claiming that they had enough evidence to proceed with the charges. However, the only evidence they actually had was Christopher's confession, which was obtained through torture and psychological pressure. On November 21st, Richard's lawyer, hired by his family, worked hard to argue that the police had illegally obtained a confession. Afterwards, the prosecution began discussing DNA tests, which they claimed matched samples found at the crime scene. The analysis indicated that Christopher could not be ruled out as a potential source of the biological materials found on the Nancy's body. However, the test results did not prove his involvement. It's important to note that the accuracy of DNA testing in the 1980s was much lower than it is today. This meant that expert opinions at the time could not effectively establish guilt. Despite this, the evidence was still presented in the case. Richard maintained his innocence and struggled to understand why his friend Christopher testified against him. The prosecution claimed that a hair found in the pizzeria matched Richard's hair. However, the investigation's findings were inconclusive. The analysis concluded that the material collected was not a follicle, which also indicated that the reliability of the test was very low. The phrasing used in the report was identical to that for Christopher. While Richard could still be considered a potential owner of the found materials, it couldn't be definitively stated that they belonged to him, especially given the low accuracy of the results. This data strengthened the prosecution's argument. Ultimately, the Supreme Court's decision relied heavily on how the prosecutor presented their case. The troubles for the young men do not end there. Christopher's family cannot afford a lawyer, so Christopher is assigned a public defender. Christopher asserts in his defense that his confession was obtained under intense moral pressure from the police, which he finds intolerable. Unfortunately, the lawyer chooses not to investigate this complaint. Instead of defending Christopher's rights, he claims that the only way to avoid the death penalty is to plead guilty. Christopher is asked to testify against Richard. Surprisingly, the lawyer shows little interest in defending Richard and quickly aligns with the prosecution. He is so certain of Richard's guilt that he opposes the investigation and questions the forensic evidence. In a discussion with Christoph, the defense even mentions a witness who claims to have seen Richard at the crime scene, adding to the list of false accusations. Furthermore, the attorney reported that Christopher's fingerprints were found on the murder weapon, so he threatened his client. In fact, the prosecutor's office did not find a gun at all. On April 6, 1989, Richard was charged with armed robbery and rape. For this crime, he could have faced a sentence of 5 to 99 years in prison. However, Christopher believed that the prosecution had shifted its focus and now considered Christopher the murderer, claiming that he had shot Nancy. In fact, the prosecution had enough evidence to convict Richard of murder. At his trial on May 5 of that year, Christopher followed his attorney's advice and pleaded guilty to first-degree murder. His cooperation resulted in a life sentence, avoiding the death penalty. Richard's trial started on January 22, 1990, and it attracted significant public attention. The courtroom was filled to capacity, creating an intense atmosphere where attendees seemed eager for immediate justice against the defendants. They were brought to court wearing bulletproof vests due to concerns over potential violence. After hearing the testimonies, the jury deliberated for just 7 minutes before finding Richard guilty of rape and related charges, resulting in a life sentence. Nancy's family expressed satisfaction with the verdict. Over a year later, it was revealed that Richard was wrongfully convicted for a crime he did not commit. During this time, he had been the victim of a brutal attack, where he was severely beaten and suffered a serious head injury that required part of his brain to be removed. Although Richard survived, he was left disabled for life. At 22, he was moved to a specialized care facility where he received 24-hour assistance, as he was no longer able to care for himself. On that significant day, the leadership of the Austin police focused on Detective Hector Palanca. It became clear that he was abusing his powers systematically, as confirmed by other department employees. There was even video evidence of Hector torturing and physically abusing a suspect to force confessions. As a result, he was initially removed from his position. However, he was later reinstated and continued to harass both guilty and innocent individuals for many years. The damage caused by Hector to the law enforcement system is hard to comprehend. One case alone led to an innocent young man being sentenced to life in prison, while another victim was left permanently disabled. Shockingly, their cases remained unexamined until 1998. The Nancy DePriest case was long considered resolved, and no one had revisited it. This situation changed when Akeem Marina stepped in and sent a letter of confession to the governor, requesting that he reach out to the lawyers. Akeem's letter to the governor's office provided information that could help the police gather physical evidence. He claimed that the handcuffs and bag used in the attack could be found at his parents' home. In addition, the gun that shot Nancy had been confiscated during his arrest for other crimes. The police eventually took the letter seriously and began investigating the case. After reviewing the information, the police were able to confirm the criminal's claims. With more evidence in the archives, they approached Christopher, who was serving a sentence in prison. At first, Christopher was skeptical about the police visit and thought they might be trying to frame him for another crime. As a result, he chose to stick to the false story he had previously confessed to, a story influenced by Officer Hector, and did not provide any useful information. Eventually, Christopher discovered that the police wanted to talk to him because of a letter from Akeem, in which Akeem had confessed to the crime. This news gave Christopher hope that he could prove his innocence and possibly be released. However, he no longer had faith in the justice system. In June 1999, he contacted a project called Innocence. In his letter, he explained his situation and when activists from the project contacted the police, the district attorney reviewed the case documents. In August 2000, DNA samples were taken from Akeem, whose conscience was tormenting him. Multiple tests were conducted, the results of which clearly showed that Akeem had indeed raped Nancy, and that Christopher and Richard had absolutely nothing to do with the crime. A ballistics test confirmed that the shot that killed Nancy had been fired from the gun confiscated from Akeem. This news shocked everyone, including Nancy's family. Officer Hector Palenka was fired from the police force and retired, and it was eventually decided that the case would be re-examined. On January 16, 2001, a Texas court overturned the convictions of Christopher and Richard, whose lives had been irreparably damaged. In court, Nancy's mother sat next to Christopher's mother, holding her hand. During the trial, Christopher admitted that under pressure from Hector Palenka, he broke down and confessed to a crime he did not commit, dragging his friend Richard into the lie. Akeem, the author of the letter, testified at trial. He claimed that he killed Nancy because he was driven to human sacrifice by voices in his head. He admitted to stealing a work uniform from another restaurant and wearing it the day he knocked on the door of the Pizza Hut where Nancy worked. Believing that he was a coworker from the same restaurant chain coming to her aid, she opened the door without fear, where he then pointed a gun at her. He demanded money and took her into the bathroom, where he raped and killed her. Akeem testified that during the attack, he pulled out a gun and pointed it at the back of her head. According to his confession, he raped her 8 times before shooting her. During the trial, Akeem revealed that he had heard voices since childhood, but they completely disappeared when he converted to Christianity while in prison. He expressed a strong desire to atone for his sins and confessed to the crime. The prosecutor's office initially wanted him to face the death penalty but eventually asked for life in prison. The judge agreed, and Akeem received 3 life sentences. An investigation was then launched into the 3 police officers who questioned Christopher and Richard, but they faced no significant consequences. Christopher and Richard were eventually found not guilty, and their convictions were overturned, leading to their release. Their families were in disbelief. Christopher shared that he often cried at night in prison, unable to understand why he was there. Both men consistently claimed their innocence, yet no one believed them. The families of Christopher and Richard were furious about the unfair 12-year sentences, which had shattered their lives. Lawyers for the wrongfully convicted filed lawsuits, resulting in financial settlements. Richard received a total of $10.25 million, $9 million from the city, $1 million from the county, and $250,000 from the state. Christopher was awarded $5.3 million, and out of a sense of guilt, he donated $500,000 to Richard. Unfortunately, Richard's condition could not improve due to the traumatic brain injury he sustained. He required lifelong care and experienced mental health issues, along with partial recovery on the left side of his body. Richard spent his remaining days surrounded by loved ones who cared for him. He passed away from cancer in 2021 at the age of 50. Christopher was released after spending 12 years in prison. He pursued higher education and established a legal practice, offering many free consultations to those in need. Details about his personal life remain unknown. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Richard Beasley. Scott Davis, 48, relocated from South Carolina to Ohio after 15 years of work there. He sought a new job with higher pay to support his mother, who was facing financial difficulties. While searching, he came across a job posting on Craigslist that said, "We need someone to take care of a 688-acre property and feed the cattle. The position offers $1,300 per week, and you will live in a lovely 2-bedroom mobile home. Older, single applicants are preferred, but we welcome all candidates. This opportunity won't last long, so please apply immediately." Scott was drawn to the benefits highlighted in the job listing. Eager to find a good job, he planned to contact the employer soon. After hearing back from Richard Beasley, the person who posted the ad, Scott was quickly offered the position. They arranged to meet at Aeon's restaurant in Marietta, where Scott met Richard and his nephew, Brogan Raffi. They appeared to be genuine farmers, which made Scott feel comfortable and trusting. To earn Scott's trust, Richard arranged a preliminary interview with him. He proposed that Scott ride with him to the job site. They drove into a remote forest area where there was no cell phone reception. Richard suddenly asked Brogan, who was driving, to stop the car, saying that he needed to pick up some equipment for the farm near where they had shot the deer last time. After that, Richard and Scott exited the vehicle. Scott offered to help, and they began walking into the forest together. As they walked, Richard stayed behind Scott. Scott then heard a clicking sound and some mumbling from behind him. When he turned around, he saw Richard pointing a gun at him. Scott understood that he was the next target. Just as Richard was about to shoot, Scott quickly pushed the gun away, causing the bullet to hit his elbow. He then sprinted away while Richard pursued him, firing his weapon. Bullets zipped past Scott's head, and he heard trees and branches snapping behind him. "Oh God, he's going to kill me," Scott thought as he faced the revolver aimed at him. He was unsure of his destination, having never been to this place before, but that didn't matter. His main goal was to escape from Richard. Suddenly, Richard shot at him, hitting Scott in the arm and knocking him to the ground. However, before Richard could take another shot, Scott quickly got back on his feet and ran. Blood flowed continuously from his injured arm. In an effort to evade the gunfire, Scott veered to the right and slipped between two large tree trunks. He descended a small, slippery slope and almost lost his footing. It was autumn, and the ground was covered with a thick layer of leaves. Scott waved his arms to maintain his balance, ignoring the pain from his gunshot wound. He realized that falling could mean the end for him. As the ground leveled off and he began to run again, he heard the sound of a revolver firing again, right behind him. A bullet zipped past his head, just inches away. When Scott broke through the underbrush, he paused, disoriented and unsure. Dense trees and bushes surrounded him, nothing familiar to guide him. The murderer was closing in, crashing through the brush. There was no time to hesitate, he had to keep running. His legs trembled with fear as he heard the revolver fire again. The reality of his situation filled him with dread. He sprinted but stumbled, sweat blurring his vision. His head spun, and a loud ringing filled his ears. Exhausted, he finally stopped by a small ditch, hiding behind a tree to listen for the gunman. Scott felt the fear radiating from him as he groaned softly. His arm bled heavily, but he felt no pain. As his heartbeat steadied, he heard distant dog barks and crows cawing. He strained to listen for anyone searching for him, but the forest remained eerily quiet. After a long wait, he believed he had escaped and felt relief, but it took him 7 hours to feel safe enough to seek help. He eventually found a house and called the police, who arrived 15 minutes later. Scott recounted everything about the job listing, Richard, and the chase. He survived an 8-hour pursuit, but not all victims are so fortunate. He wasn't the first to apply for that job, hundreds had been hired before him. In August 2011, a 56-year-old man named Ralph Geiger faced hardship, unemployed and living in a camp in Aiken, Ohio. In August 2011, Ralph faced difficult circumstances after losing his job and having to move into a homeless shelter in Aiken, Ohio. He was determined to rebuild his life. After graduating from high school in the 1970s, he had moved to California to work with his father in an antique shop. He returned to Ohio in the late 1990s and started his own successful business, where he hired workers and earned a living by renovating homes and taking on various odd jobs. Unfortunately, when the economy entered a recession and the housing market declined, Ralph's business began to struggle. By the end of 2010, he realized he could no longer afford his rent, which led him to seek shelter in a homeless facility. Ralph lost his apartment and faced difficult times, but at least he didn't have the added responsibility of supporting a wife and children, as he was a lifelong bachelor. His close friend, Summer Rowley, who he considered like a daughter, is 26 years old. They have maintained a strong bond since he hired her to clean his house many years ago. Ralph has always been willing to help his friends. In the summer of 2011, Ralph visited the library every day to search for jobs online. By the end of July, he excitedly shared with Summer that he had secured a fantastic position managing a 600-acre livestock farm and taking care of the nearby houses. This job offered him a free mobile home and a weekly salary of $300. Summer was thrilled for Ralph and felt he truly deserved this new opportunity. Ralph appeared content as well, expressing that this job was a great chance for him to regain his economic independence. Ralph reached out to Summer on August 8, 2011, to inform her that he would begin his new job in Caldwell the following day. Summer wished him good luck and encouraged him to stay in touch. However, as days went by without any updates from Ralph, Summer became increasingly concerned. She attempted to call him multiple times, but each time she only reached his voicemail. By October, she learned that Ralph's phone number had been disconnected. Summer encountered someone else when she called Ralph's phone, which appeared to have been reassigned. Although she was concerned about Ralph, she didn't report him missing because she wasn't certain he was actually gone missing. Ralph had gone missing before but always returned. A similar situation occurred just weeks before Scott's case, involving 51-year-old David Pauley, who had faced difficult years. His marriage ended 2 years earlier, leaving him feeling unhappy and disillusioned. Starting anew in his 50s was particularly challenging for him. After his divorce, David found comfort in using his computer, often exploring various topics online. One night in October 2011, he came across an intriguing ad on Craigslist. In the Help Wanted section, he found a job listing for a farm caretaker to oversee a 688-acre farm in rural Ohio. The position offered a weekly salary of $1,300 and included the use of a free trailer on the property. David, who lived in Norfolk, Virginia, was curious and excited about a new opportunity. He thought taking a break from the city would be a big change, and rural Ohio, with its rivers, lakes, and wide open spaces, seemed like the perfect choice. Plus, having a free place to stay would help him save money. He responded to an advertisement and soon heard back. His twin sister, Deborah Bruce, kept in touch with him regularly. On October 22, 2011, David called her. He sounded very happy and excited as he shared the news about a job he found on Craigslist. He talked about a farm in Noble County, Ohio, and his dreams of starting a new life. His truck, filled with his belongings, was parked outside the motel. Deborah and David chatted for a while. Deborah wished her brother good luck and reminded him to stay in touch. David promised he would try, but he mentioned that there was no cell service at the farm. After they hung up, neither of them realized it would be their last conversation. Back to Scott's story, after Scott escaped a dangerous situation and reported it to the police, they tried to access the CCTV footage from the diner where he met Richard and Brogan. However, they encountered a problem. A fire had damaged the surveillance room the night before, making it difficult to recover the footage. The news reported on a man who posted a job ad on Craigslist. Instead of offering employment, he lured his victims into the woods and murdered them. This shocking story attracted significant media attention. Meanwhile, David's sister, who hadn't heard from him in some time, saw the news and contacted the police. They quickly determined that David was another victim of a man named Richard. The police searched the forest for clues related to an attempted murder of another victim, Scott. After 2 days, they found a baseball cap that Scott had dropped while running, and soon after, they uncovered a grave that had been dug for him. A K-9 unit was called in, and shortly thereafter, the dogs alerted the officers to something unusual. They discovered another body buried in the damp soil, which turned out to be David, who had been shot in the back of the head. A few days later, authorities discovered another grave with a body that lacked any identification. The sheriff's office in Noble County reached out to the FBI for assistance in finding out who had posted the job advertisement. They needed the FBI's help to trace the poster using the IP address and the advertisement's content. They determined that the job seeker was looking for someone very specific, someone who could vanish without drawing much attention. During interviews, if the applicant mentioned being married or having combat or martial arts experience, Richard would reject them. He was only interested in older men. He did not respond to any inquiries from women who applied. The victims, Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Scott Davis, fit the criteria set by the suspect. Another man, Timothy Kern, a 47-year-old divorced father living with his 3 sons, also matched these criteria. When he accepted a job in Ohio, he had to leave his sons behind. Timothy responded to the advertisement on November 10th, just 2 days after Scott Davis's incident. On November 12th, he visited his sons to say goodbye before heading to Ohio. After that, no one heard from him again. Once Timothy went missing, the investigation intensified. About 2 weeks later, the FBI traced the IP address of the ad poster to a house in Akron, Ohio, owned by a man named Joe. Joe claimed he didn't use Craigslist and that the ads were not his. He was unfamiliar with Richard but mentioned that a man had rented a room there. The police obtained surveillance footage from a diner, which showed a local man named Richard Beasley. When Joe viewed the footage, he recognized the man, but noted he had introduced himself as Ralph Geiger. The police were unaware that they had discovered Ralph, the first victim of Richard Beasley, buried in an unmarked grave. They also identified Brogan Raffi as Richard's accomplice and a high school student. Brogan was swiftly arrested and taken to jail. So who was Richard Beasley and why did he become a serial killer? Richard Beasley, born in 1959, grew up in Akron, Ohio, primarily with his mother, who worked in an office. After graduation, he became a mechanic but had a criminal history, serving 5 years in a Texas prison for burglary and another 7 years for weapon possession. He later returned to Ohio secretly, adopting a new identity. He created a facade of a compassionate man, pretending to be a pastor and going to church daily. However, his life took a turn when he became addicted to drugs following a car accident, and he eventually stopped working and lost his ability to earn money. Richard met Brogan at church. Brogan was the son of someone in Richard's motorcycle group. Richard decided to guide Brogan by discussing the importance of education and the dangers of drugs. However, despite his preachy attitude, Richard was actually involved in shady activities. He found an apartment near the street, where he sought out vulnerable people, such as homeless people and drug addicts, to do shady things. The police eventually caught onto his schemes, forcing Richard to create a new false identity. He then shifted his focus to targeting homeless and unemployed individuals to steal their money and identities. In exchange for a reduced sentence, Brogan agreed to testify against Richard and reveal everything he had done. Brogan reported that he witnessed Richard lead Ralph, the first victim, into the forest, which was the same location where Richard later lured David and Scott. In his report, Brogan described the incident, stating that on a hot summer night, they took Ralph into the forest. He mentioned that he walked ahead while Richard and the others returned to the car and that he didn't join them. He recalled that suddenly, there was a loud noise, prompting him to go back to the car to grab a shovel. When he returned, he noted that Ralph was still there and that Richard had put Ralph's clothes and personal belongings into a garbage bag. Richard dug a hole that was about waist deep and roughly 4 feet wide, and that they had difficulty placing Ralph's body in it. Finally, he added that they sprinkled lime over him as a sort of ritual. After Richard took on Ralph's identity, he dyed his hair, changed his clothes, and trimmed his beard to resemble Ralph. He found a job and took pleasure in his new life. Many of Richard's victims would arrive with most of their belongings in their cars, which he later sold. Scott Davis had mentioned that he would bring his Harley motorcycle to the interview. Richard ultimately targeted Timothy Kern as his last victim. Timothy, 47, encountered the same job search difficulties as the other victims. He found a promising job opportunity, but it required him to move to a different location. Timothy was reluctant to leave his children behind. Since his divorce in 1997, he had kept a strong bond with his ex-wife and their 3 sons, who all lived in Massillon. As a dedicated father and passionate baseball coach, Timothy prioritized spending quality time with his kids. When he couldn't be with them in person, he maintained their family connections through social media, particularly Facebook. On November 10, 2011, Timothy posted on his Facebook wall about an exciting job opportunity to manage a large 680-acre farm near Cambridge, Ohio. The position offered him a truck, housing with all rent and utility costs covered, and a generous weekly salary. However, he was concerned about the farm's remote location, which had no mobile phone service. Although he was apprehensive about leaving his family, the opportunity was too appealing for Timothy to ignore. He got ready to move on Sunday, although feeling a sense of sadness about being away from his cherished children. On November 12, Timothy went to his ex-wife's house to say goodbye and collect some essentials for his move. He spent valuable time with his sons before leaving the following morning. One of Timothy's sons received a loving message from him, but nobody realized it would be their final farewell. Unlike previous victims, Timothy was taken by Richard to a different location behind an abandoned shopping center in Akron. Brogan dug the grave, and Richard shot Timothy in the back of the head. The police were unaware of Richard's address, but they eventually arrested him. Richard didn't realize that Joe, the landlord of his rental home, had contacted the police, who then used Richard's IP address to locate him. As a result, when Richard called and messaged Joe, it assisted the police in tracking him down. He was arrested on November 16, 3 days after killing Timothy. Richard faces charges for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern, as well as the attempted murder of Scott Davis, along with numerous other charges. Richard Beasley and Brogan Raffi were tried in 2013 for the murders of Ralph Geiger, David Pauly, and Timothy Kern. Brogan Raffi had the opportunity to accept a deal for a lighter sentence by providing information about Richard, but he chose to decline. As a result, he was convicted and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for 3 counts of first-degree murder. Although Brogan remained silent, it was difficult to refute the evidence against him when Scott Davis, a key witness and victim, agreed to testify in court. There was also substantial evidence from the crime scene, including personal belongings and identification of the victims found at Richard's home. Despite his claims of innocence, the evidence clearly pointed to his guilt. Richard's trial took place later that year, resulting in the death penalty. He was convicted of first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, aggravated robbery, and kidnapping. In 2020, Richard Beasley was retried after a procedural error was found in his 2013 trial. He returned to the Summit County Common Pleas Court for resentencing, but the outcome was unchanged. He was again sentenced to death and received multiple consecutive sentences for his other crimes. At 61 years old, Richard appeared via video from the Chillicothe Correctional Institution. He was sitting in a wheelchair next to his attorney, Don Hicks, and both were wearing masks during the sentencing. Richard's other attorney, Donald Gallick, argued via video that adding multiple consecutive sentences was unnecessary for someone already facing the death penalty. However, Assistant Summit County Prosecutor Jack Cor insisted that Richard's sentence should remain unchanged. Judge Kelly McLaughlin of Summit County Common agreed with the prosecutors, stating that multiple consecutive sentences were needed to accurately represent the defendant's criminal actions. During the trial, Richard inquired whether he could reclaim a Celtic cross that had been taken during the investigation. He mentioned that the necklace had been passed down in his family and expressed his desire to give it to his newly married daughter, insisting that it was unrelated to the case. He stated that there was no reason for them to keep it, emphasizing that it was the only thing his daughter would have from him. It was noted that it was ironic for a murderer responsible for taking the lives of many innocent people to portray himself as a caring father. It remains unclear whether his treatment toward his daughter was genuinely good or merely a facade intended to influence the jury's perception of him as compassionate and incapable of being the serial killer he was charged with being. His mother was there, trusting in his innocence. However, due to clear evidence, the testimony of the living victim, and the confession of his accomplice heard in court, Richard had to face the consequences of what he had done. When the sentence was announced, Richard's mother stayed quiet and didn't say anything more. Richard appealed the decision but was unsuccessful. Since the trial, he has repeatedly asserted his innocence, but no one believes him. He is currently imprisoned at the Chilo Correctional Institution in Ohio, waiting for his execution date. Richard almost managed to evade capture, but his gun jammed, which allowed Scott Davis to escape. Had Scott not escaped and reported the incident, it's likely that the serial killer in the woods would have gone unnoticed, resulting in many more victims. The story begins with an online job ad that the victims responded to without thinking twice. The key takeaway is to be careful when you see job postings online. Make sure to research both the job and the employer thoroughly to protect yourself from scammers or dangerous individuals. Hey detectives! Welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Angie Hausman. Angie Hausman was born on February 18, 1984, in St. Louis, Missouri. Her father left the family before she was born, and she would never have the chance to meet him. However, her mother married a man named Ronald when she was 1 year old, and in the addition of a younger brother to the family. The two sisters got along very well, with Angie particularly fond of her younger brother. Angie was known for her friendly and outgoing personality, always striving to build relationships with those around her. Her family resided in a peaceful suburban neighborhood in St. Louis. In 1993, at the age of 9, Angie attended the 4th grade at a local elementary school, about a mile away from her home. Her daily go-to-school involved taking a bus from a nearby stop, which her parents considered relatively safe due to its proximity to their house. Typically, Angie and her neighborhood friends walked together from the school to the bus stop after class. There were many parents watching from their windows to ensure their safety. This has become a habit in their neighborhood, intended to provide peace of mind that children will return home safely. On November 18th, Angie followed her usual routine, attending school and finishing at 3 p.m. She took the school bus home with a few neighborhood kids. At that point, the other kids continued to their homes. Angie walked alone the short remaining distance home, because her house was farther away. However, Angie didn't arrive home, and as the minutes passed, her parents started to worry. They knew Angie often chatted with friends on her way home, but it has never taken this long. Concerned, Angie's mom and stepdad decided to walk along her route from the house to the bus stop to see if they could find her. While walking, they met other kids from Angie's school. They confirmed she had gotten off the bus with them and headed in the direction of her home. The parents also spoke with neighbors who usually kept an eye on the kids, but were preoccupied on that particular day and hadn't seen anything. Angie's parents became more and more worried and insecure. They and their friends started searching the area along her route from the bus stop to their home. As the sun began to set and darkness fell, they didn't give up. Realizing Angie was unlikely to wander off in the cold weather, the parents eventually decided to call the police. The police immediately joined the search for Angie. Due to the cold weather, it seemed unlikely that she would wander off alone. Therefore, the police initially focused on investigating whether she had been kidnapped. 10 days before Angie went missing, an 11-year-old girl was almost kidnapped in a nearby area, which made everyone even more concerned. An unknown person approached the girl as she got off the school bus and attempted to pull her into the bushes. Fortunately, she managed to escape. However, since the assailant was still at large, the police believed he might be linked to Angie's disappearance. To investigate, officers deployed K9 units, which detected Angie's scent near the bus stop. The dogs tracked the scent about halfway to her house, but lost it suddenly, suggesting that Angie might have gotten into a vehicle at that location, which further supported the possibility of an abduction. The police expanded their search for Angie by deploying helicopters with thermal sensors and scouring the banks of a nearby stream, but they failed to locate either the girl or her belongings. The first day, the search turned up no results. As the investigation unfolded, the police released information about Angie's disappearance to the media, which quickly spread throughout the city. The police then department receiving over 300 calls within 24 hours. To manage the influx of leads, more than 20 additional officers were assigned to the case. However, none of these clues were helpful in finding Angie. The detectives pursued every lead, with a strong focus on Angie's stepfather from the beginning. Despite this, he insisted he was innocent and willingly cooperated with the investigation, even agreeing to take a lie detector test in an effort to clear his name and help the police focus on finding Angie. During the investigation into Angie's biological father, a new piece of information came to light. Although he had never been in direct contact with his daughter, but the biological father had allegedly driven past her house multiple times to watch her play outside, according to Angie's mother. While detectives found this behavior suspicious, the biological father had a solid alibi that checked out. By the third day, the FBI joined the investigation, and the police department allocated even more officers to the case. It was clear to everyone that something serious had happened to Angie, as she could barely survive on the streets in such harsh weather conditions. A break in the case came when a witness in Angie's neighborhood reported seeing a suspicious man driving a blue sedan. The description matched a person who had attempted to abduct a girl just 10 days earlier. Based on this, investigators created a composite sketch, which was featured in the media and appearing on thousands of distributed flyers. Unfortunately, the identity of the suspect remained a mystery. As Angie's disappearance gained national attention through television, the number of leads increased. Police carefully evaluated each one but found no connections to the case. However, as the case drew more public attention, psychics started contacting Angie's family, claiming to have had visions of the missing girl. One psychic even named a specific location, a large national park 25 miles from Angie's home, where they believed she was being held. However, detectives chose not to pursue this information. To encourage tips, a $10,000 reward was offered for any information about Angie's location, resulting in an influx of tips. During the investigation, detectives discovered a disturbing detail. A few days before she disappeared, Angie mentioned to her teacher that she would be going on a nature trip with her uncle. However, this statement raised red flags, as Angie did not actually have an uncle, and her parents were unaware of what she meant by this claim. Detectives considered the possibility that Angie might have known the person who took her, referring to them as her uncle in conversation. Despite their efforts, investigators failed to uncover any information about this mysterious individual in the days that followed. The case seemed to be at a standstill, until 9 days after Angie's disappearance on November 27th. A young girl's body was discovered near a tree, severely mistreated. She had no clothing on and was bound with handcuffs. Her head was completely covered in tape, except for a small exposed area around her nose. A nearby bag contained personal items, including notebooks with her name, that confirmed the body was that of Angie. Autopsies by medical examiners revealed more disturbing details about Angie's death. A piece of underwear was found stuffed in her mouth after the tape on her head was removed. The investigation determined that she had died just hours before her discovery and had likely been held captive for 9 days before succumbing. Furthermore, experts concluded that Angie suffered numerous physical injuries and endured a sexual assault. A thorough examination of the crime scene by forensic experts led to the discovery of a fingerprint on the tape used to cover Angie's head. The police tried to find matching information in the database and between several suspects, but didn't bring any clues. Following the discovery of the body, the police increased their efforts in the investigation. As news of the tragic incident spread, local residents became fearful, increasing their vigilance. To protect their children, they started escorting them to and from school, meeting them at bus stops, and keeping a close watch over them at all times. On December 1st, a 10-year-old girl named Casey Dissa went missing in a nearby town, just 10 miles from Angie's house. Casey had received permission from her mother to visit friends who lived a short distance away, but she never made it to their home. The police were unsuccessful in locating her, fueling the detectives' fear that they might be dealing with a serial killer. Initially, detectives did not rule out the possibility that the same person was responsible for both Angie's and Casey's disappearances. However, they lacked evidence to support this theory. 10 days later, Casey's body was found in St. Louis, wrapped in bedding in a curtain. The cause of death was determined to be severe head trauma from multiple blows. Despite the investigation, detectives were unable to uncover any leads pointing to the killer. Furthermore, the distinct nature of the two crimes led them to reconsider their initial theory. As a result, they began to consider the possibility of two separate murderers in the same month. Investigations into Angie's disappearance led detectives to identify a man who had attempted to abduct another girl a few days earlier. The suspect, 37-year-old Gary, frequently traveled to St. Louis for work. Although he became a person of interest in the murders of Angie and Casey, he had a solid alibi for the time they went missing. However, during questioning, Gary admitted to assaulting 4 other girls and was ultimately sentenced to 5 years in prison. The following February, the case took a new turn. Near where Casey's body was found, investigators found tire tracks that were associated with a pickup truck from a well-known rental car company known for its distinctive logo. Detectives showed photos of the tire tracks to locals, asking if they had seen a pickup truck from that company in the area. The detectives received a crucial lead. One woman came forward, saying she had seen such a pickup near her neighbor's house about a week after Casey's disappearance. After investigation, the police discovered that the house belonged to a woman living with her husband and brother. She claimed none of them had rented the pickup and maintained they were not connected to the case. However, detectives remained skeptical and obtained a search warrant for the house. The search revealed blood matching Casey's in the basement, along with the murder weapon. A further investigation uncovered key information in Casey's case. The pickup truck used to transport the body was rented by Thomas, the brother of the woman who owned the house. Initially, Thomas denied any involvement in the crime. However, when presented with the existing evidence, he eventually confessed. According to Thomas's statement, Casey knocked on his door and wanted to invite his nephews to come out with her. Thomas invited Casey into the house and led her to the basement, where he attempted to assault her. When Casey screamed, Thomas hit her with a heavy object, ultimately killing her. He then covered her body with bed sheets. Despite committing the crime, Thomas went to work as usual. Upon returning home, Thomas' sister told him that she had discovered the body in the basement, but she didn't want to know what had happened and asked that it be disposed of quickly. Casey's body remained in the basement for a week because outside, the search was still going on for her. Thomas was too afraid to move Casey's body until the investigation died down. Once the situation became less intense, Thomas rented a pickup truck, transported Casey's body to St. Louis, and abandoned it there. Thomas was eventually convicted of Casey's murder and received a death sentence. However, he died in prison several years later due to illnesses before the sentence could be carried out. During the investigation, Thomas denied any connection to Angie's case, leading detectives to believe that the two cases were not connected. The investigation into Angie's murder stagnated for many months, with the number of leads dwindling over time. Years later, detectives encountered a new obstacle: the expiration of the reward for providing information, which detectives feared would decrease public involvement. However, a local businessman donated $250,000 to incentivize people to come forward with information. This bonus was one of the biggest at the time, generated a large number of tips, but disappointingly, the case remains unsolved. In 2001, a prison inmate named Corey Fox contacted detectives and confessed to over 10 murders, including the murder of Angie Hausman. Detectives met with Corey, then he recounted how he and an accomplice abducted Angie from the street and held her captive in his house for several days. Initially, the plan was to demand a ransom in exchange for Angie's safe return. However, Corey and his accomplice became concerned that they might be identified and decided to murder her. Corey provided detectives with many accurate details about the crime, including the fact that Angie was tied to a tree and that his accomplice used her underwear as a gag. However, some discrepancies arose during the questioning, particularly with regards to how Angie was restrained. Corey claimed that they used plastic handcuffs, but evidence showed that perpetrator actually used iron handcuffs. Furthermore, investigators discovered that Corey could not have committed some of the murders he confessed to. As a result, police concluded that he likely fabricated parts of his confession, possibly drawing information from media of Angie's case. In the summer of 2002, when a 6-year-old girl was abducted from her home and murdered in a different St. Louis neighborhood, authorities initially considered whether the two crimes were connected, but this theory proved unfounded. The killer, a neighbor, was quickly caught and confessed during questioning. The investigation into Angie's case lay dormant for several years, until 2007, when detectives reopened the file. Upon reviewing the case documents, they stumbled upon a noteworthy detail. Shortly after Angie's body was discovered, police had found a man named Roger Martin sitting in a parked car nearby. When questioned about his emergence, Roger claimed he was in the area to go hunting. However, a search of his vehicle revealed no hunting equipment, raising suspicions about his true intentions. The new detective team decided to investigate Roger further, which revealed his prior convictions for crimes against children. Notably, one of his past victims was assaulted near the area where Angie's body was discovered. All of these crimes happened before Angie's death, but the police had failed to thoroughly look into Roger at the time. This meant that the new team had to start over from the beginning. The detectives brought Roger in for questioning, but he denied any involvement in Angie's murder. He claimed that he just happened to be near that location. The interrogation lasted 9 hours, but still yielded no new clues. The police compared Roger's fingerprints with the ones on the tape found on Angie's head, but the experts found that they did not match. As a result, Roger was released. Although the police continued to consider him a suspect, they lacked sufficient evidence to hold him. The case of Angie saw a breakthrough in 2018, when the St. Louis Police Department created a task force specifically to investigate this case. With the advancement of technology, the detectives re-examined the existing evidence, searching for new leads. Their investigation centered on three crucial pieces of evidence: the handcuffs, the tape from Angie's head, and her underwear used as a gag. Despite repeated efforts since 1993, experts had struggled to detect the perpetrator's DNA on these items. The task force decided to re-examine the evidence with modern technology. The detectives first focused on the handcuffs but encountered a difficulty due to the presence of Angie's blood covering almost the entire surface. Next, they turned their attention to the tape from Angie's head, but faced another obstacle. Upon opening the box containing the evidence, they discovered that the tape had deteriorated significantly over time. Finally, they examined the underwear that had been used to gag Angie. Although they did not have much hope for this evidence, since it had been in her mouth for hours, so it was likely that any foreign DNA had been removed. However, they still investigated it as a last resort. Using advanced technology, they carefully examined every inch of the underwear, leading to a breakthrough. A small sample of DNA was found, sufficient for analysis. The experts confirmed the DNA belonged to a male and immediately uploaded it to the FBI database. Although it is common for DNA searches to yield no matches, requiring additional investigation, the detectives were fortunate in this case. As soon as the DNA sample was uploaded, they received a full match. The DNA belonged to 58-year-old Earl Cox, who had been incarcerated since 2003. In the investigation into Angie's case, Earl Cox initially had not been on the police's radar, but his criminal record was substantial. His history of crime dated back to 1982, when he was serving in the military in Germany and working as a part-time babysitter. 4 girls reported being sexually assaulted by Earl, resulting in an 8-year prison sentence in the United States. He was subsequently discharged from the Army after serving only 3 years. Earl was released from prison early and moved to St. Louis. However, 4 years later, he found himself in trouble with the law again. In this instance, he was arrested after 2 7-year-old girls accused him of sexually assaulting them. Although the charges were eventually dropped due to a lack of evidence, the arrest itself was a parole violation. As a result, Earl received an additional year in prison. After serving this extra year, Earl was released in 1992 and settled in St. Louis, where his relatives lived. The following year, a tragic incident happened. Earl abducted and killed Angie. In 2002, Earl was arrested again for operating a secret online platform where individuals shared child abuse content. The FBI had been monitoring his activities and set a trap by having an undercover agent pose as a 14-year-old girl and make contact with him. Earl made explicit intentions to exploit the girl and sent money for her to meet him. However, when Earl showed up at the meeting place, he was met by armed FBI agents instead of the girl. This led to his arrest. A search of his computer revealed a massive collection of over 45,000 images of child abuse. Further investigation also revealed that Earl was the mastermind behind the platform, leading to the arrest of 60 more individuals associated with the site. This operation was one of the largest against pedophiles in the country. In 2003, Earl was sentenced to 10 years in prison. However, when his sentence ended, a judge used a legal loophole to keep Earl in detention, citing him as a serious threat to children. As a result, Earl remained in prison. In 2019, a DNA match linked Earl to Angie Hausman's case. Detectives visited him in prison, but Earl denied involvement and requested a lawyer. Despite the strong DNA evidence, investigators took an alternative approach. They offered Earl's lawyer a deal. In exchange for Earl's confession, the prosecution would drop the death penalty and pursue a life sentence instead. Earl agreed, likely aware that he would lose the case in court. When detectives returned to the prison, Earl shared his account of incident. Although some details raised suspicions, his admission to the murder was the key point for investigators. Earl claimed that on November 18, 1993, he was driving through his family's neighborhood when his car broke down. And while he was trying to find out what was wrong with the car, a school bus pulled up and children disembarked. While the others went home, Angie remained outside, drawing Earl's attention. Earl claimed that when Angie approached him, they had a brief chat, and he noticed she seemed extremely cold. He offered her a ride in his car, which she allegedly accepted. Earl then took Angie to Burger King to get food, and afterwards, took her to his home. Here, he sexually assaulted her for several days. Eventually, Earl decided to dispose of Angie, drove her to a remote location, where her body was later found, and tied her to a tree. However, she was still alive at that time. Detectives had doubts about certain parts of Earl's story. They didn't think Angie would agree to go anywhere with a stranger, especially since she only had a short distance to walk home. Investigators have questioned Earl's story about the car breakdown, as he claimed the car stalled but started again as soon as Angie approached. It seems more likely that Earl saw Angie and decided to abduct her. A more probable scenario is that he lured her into the car by lying or threatening her. This is more credible than his confession. Detectives were to obtain the confession they needed for the murder. Earl Cox was sentenced to life in prison without parole by a judge in August 2020. Although justice had been served, it came too late for Angie's mother, who had passed away from cancer in 2016. Her husband, Ronald, felt that Cox's actions had indirectly contributed to her death. As her grief over losing Angie had weakened her health and will to live, ultimately leading to her passing. For Earl, his sentence was more than just the initial verdict. Authorities re-examined a previous case of sexual abuse involving two 7-year-old girls, for which Earl had initially received a lenient sentence. At that time, he had only spent 1 year in prison for violating his parole. However, years later, investigators contacted one of his victims, now an adult, and asked for her testimony against him. Faced with the of a life sentence, Earl chose to plead guilty and as a result, received an additional 10-year prison sentence. Hello again, true crime fans, we've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Peter Tobin. Peter Britton Tobin was born on August 27, 1946, in Johnstone, Scotland. He was the youngest of 8 children born to Marjorie and Daniel Tobin. From an early age, Peter displayed an impulsive personality, prompting his parents to send him to boarding school in 1953 when he was only 7 years old. However, this did not work, and he was sent to a reformatory. After completing his time there, he moved to Brighton, England. There, Peter began a relationship with Margaret Mount, a young typist who was attracted to his personality. They married in August 1969, but soon, Peter's ruthless, controlling, and abusive personality manifested itself. Not only that, Peter also became involved in criminal activities. A year later, he was convicted and imprisoned in England for theft and counterfeiting. Margaret decided to divorce him in 1973. Peter then married Sylvia Jeffrey, a 30-year-old local nurse, who was also attracted to his charm. That year, they had their first son, Ian, and a year later, a daughter, Claire, who unfortunately died shortly after birth. Sylvia was devastated by the loss of her child, became a victim of Peter's abuse, and decided to leave in 1976, taking their young son with her. Years later, when he was in his 40s, Peter was ready for a new romantic relationship. This time, he chose Kathy Wilson, a sensitive, naive, and impressionable 16-year-old girl. This made it easy for Peter to start a relationship with Kathy. The two moved in together, and soon after, their son, Daniel, was born. They married in 1989 and moved to Scotland. This was a difficult time for Kathy. Her husband was controlling, preventing her from going out and becoming increasingly violent. Eventually, Kathy bravely decided to run away with her son in the late 1990s. Kathy's departure brought out the worst in Peter. After Kathy left, Peter met a gentle girl named Vicky Hamilton. Vicky was born in Scotland in 1976 and was the second child of Michael and Janet Hamilton. She had 3 siblings, Sharon, Lee, and Lindsay. However, arguments arose between Peter and Vicky and they quickly divorced. Vicky, Lee, and Lindsay lived with their mother and moved to South London. Sharon still lives in Bath, but this did not prevent Vicky and Sharon from maintaining the same close relationship as before. The evening of February 10th was cold and snowy. On a hangout with Sharon, Vicky checked her fare and went over the bus route with Sharon. They hugged goodbye. At the bus stop, while eating a bag of chips, Vicky met Peter. He pulled Vicky into his car, raped her, and then killed her. When Vicky failed to visit her mother's house, and there was no news of her, her family began to search for her. They reported her disappearance to the police. As the police investigated the case, Vicky's image became prominent across Scotland, and the search for her became one of the largest in the country's history. The runaway theory was reinforced on February 21, 1991, when Vicky's purse was found near the main bus station in Edinburgh. It was, in fact, a false clue planted by Peter to throw investigators off track. The attempt was successful, sending the investigation off track. Detectives spent 2 months searching London unsuccessfully. It was then revealed that Vicky's mother had died. Over the next 10 years, Vicky's family and townspeople continued to pursue the case, but with more than 7,000 names on file, nearly 4,000 statements taken, some 500 documents and 380 potential physical evidence, all to no avail. The case was eventually dropped. The next young woman to have Peter's misfortune was Dinah McNichol, an Essex native with a brother and 3 sisters. Her father was a jazz musician and her mother had died in a car accident many years earlier. At 18, Dinah was a kind, cheerful girl and a great friend. She had just graduated from high school and had high hopes for the future. She was torn between taking a year off to travel or going to college, but she was undecided. On the first weekend of August 1991, Dinah attended a music festival in Hampshire. There, she met a boy named David Tremlett. They quickly fell in love. On Sunday, August 4th, they spent the night together in a tent. The next day, Dinah helped him take down the tent and they agreed to each hitchhike home. As they were both tired, Peter showed up and offered to give them a ride. David got out of the car first, and Dinah saved Peter's number before parting ways. Alone with the strange driver, the girl was about to face a real nightmare. On Monday, August 5, 1991, he did the same to her as he had done to Vicky. Dinah's scarf became a crime tool. After the crime, Peter withdrew money from Dinah's account at ATMs in Hampshire and Sussex. When Dinah's family saw the withdrawals from her account, they immediately suspected something was wrong. They knew she had carefully saved every penny and planned to use it for travel or education. As the days passed, the family lived in fear and uncertainty, which was the worst thing. Although no one said it, everyone believed that something terrible had happened. If Dinah were still alive, she would have returned home or called to explain her absence. As for Peter, he left Margate without saying goodbye or explaining anything. In 1993, he settled in Hampshire, renting a flat in Leek Park, saying he wanted to be closer to his son. On August 4, 1993, 2 14-year-old girls went to visit Dinah but did not see her. So they asked the neighbors if anyone had seen Dinah, which led to them knocking on Peter's door. Peter invited the 2 girls into his house, ostensibly to wait for Dinah. They saw his friendly 5-year-old son and agreed without suspicion. While the child was asleep, Peter began to torment the 2 girls. He threatened them with a knife and forced them to drink alcohol, then beat and raped them. One of the girls was seriously injured. Fortunately, the child woke up in time and saved them from the same terrible fate as the two previous victims. Peter wanted to hide the truth from his son, so he decided to leave the apartment with the child. Before leaving at around 2 a.m., he turned on the gas stove to complete his monstrous plan. However, the two girls were lucky to wake up and escape. They went to the police and reported everything that had happened. After that, Peter returned the child to his mother and joined a sect called the Jesus Fellowship under a false name. But the media published his photo, provided by the police, and his face became widely known. With the help of BBC Crime Watch, Peter was finally arrested after 40 days on the run in Brighton. Peter appeared in court on May 18, 1994 and pleaded guilty to sexual assault and indecent assault on two young girls. As a result, he was sentenced to 14 years in prison. However, Peter was released in 2014 at the age of 58 without serving the full sentence. After his release, Peter returned to Scotland with the aim of hiding in the same area to avoid being identified as a sex offender. He evaded capture for a long time until 2006. During this time, Peter used a false name and posed as a homeless person. He sought refuge at St. Patrick's Cathedral in Glasgow. Under the name Peter McLaughlin, Peter approached a charity couple from the church group, Dennis and Katie Curran. Katie still felt uneasy about Peter despite his frail appearance. On the other hand, having been raised Catholic, Peter felt comfortable in the church. He begged there, which helped him gain sympathy from the parishioners. This gave Peter the freedom to move around unnoticed and provided him with an ideal hiding place. Here, Peter met Angelika Kluck, a 23-year-old girl from Poland. She came to Scotland in the summer of 2006 to work and pay for her language lessons. Angelika was living in the rectory of St. Patrick's Church and doing cleaning work. Peter took an immediate liking to Angelika and convinced her to help him with various tasks. On Sunday, September 24, 2006, Angelika helped Peter paint a shed. Some parishioners saw them together. But unexpectedly, Peter attacked Angelika at the back of the chapel. Leica Brown, 47, and her husband, Andrew, 46, were at home when they heard a woman screaming through an open window. Leica described the scream as a short, loud sound, like someone being forcibly restrained. The scream made her nervous and she got up from her chair, but when she got to the window, she couldn't see anything. Hours passed and the parishioners noticed that Angelika was no longer there. That was when Dennis and Katie quickly reported the unusual disappearance to the police. The police immediately began investigating and interviewed every member of the community. During these interviews, it was discovered that the last person anyone saw with Angelika was Peter, albeit under the guise of a homeless. He eventually became the prime suspect and the police came to question him, but found no evidence. The investigation continued. Peter knew that it was only a matter of time before they found the body and traced it back to him, so he fled to London. By this time, Detective David Swindle had joined the investigation and began to suspect that this might not just be a disappearance. Everything they found, as well as the testimonies they gathered, made him think that Angelika was unlikely to be found alive. Finally, on September 29, 2006, authorities discovered the body in the chapel. This news shocked British society, especially because of the location chosen by the perpetrator to hide the body. Looking at the injuries sustained by the girl, Detective David suspected that the perpetrator was not acting for the first time. However, there was more news to come. The DNA found at the crime scene and on the victim's body matched the data in the United Kingdom's National Criminal Intelligence Database. That's when they learned that the man they were looking for was Peter Tobin, whose fingerprints were also found at the crime scene. The first step for the authorities was to publish his photograph in the media. His image was also sent nationwide for distribution, and the Scottish police contacted the Metropolitan Police, initiating a search throughout the United Kingdom. Meanwhile, Peter, who was in London, tried to hide in a place where he believed he wouldn't be sought. He went to a hospital, pretending to have heart problems, claiming to have chest pain and weakness on the left side of his body. He identified himself as a plumber and called himself James Kelly. He was examined by Dr. Nick Lasso, who conducted several tests. However, something in his demeanor and behavior made the doctor uncomfortable. Initially, he avoided eye contact, which was unusual for a patient. Then, when the tests didn't reveal any physical reasons for the pain he claimed to be experiencing, the doctor became suspicious. His suspicions were confirmed by a nurse who recognized Peter from a photograph circulating in the media. As a result, both the nurse and the doctor contacted the police. This phone call changed the entire dynamic of the investigation. On September 30th, police officer Alan Murray was dispatched to the hospital in London. Peter was taken to a room and Alan went to talk to him. He was immediately arrested. Although initially, he was charged only with a violation of the sex offender registry, this thing allowed the officers to buy time to prepare a criminal case against him. Evidence gathered by the police team led by Detective David led to Peter's trial for the crimes committed against Angelica in late March 2007. Despite all the evidence against him, Peter denied committing any violent acts against the young woman. However, in an attempt to shift blame for the rape, he claimed that they engaged in consensual sexual activity. Peter also denied providing false information to the police and hospital staff. After 6 weeks of legal proceedings, his lies and manipulations proved futile as he was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 21 years. Detective David and his team suspected that there were more mysteries to Peter's story. During the trial, the detectives further investigated Peter's life, gathered more evidence and built a profile with the cooperation of various law enforcement agencies. To avoid affecting the case involving Angelica, they chose to carry out their work discreetly and carefully. The joint police investigation was called Anagram. Investigators identified links between the disappearances and locations that Peter had visited. The investigation revealed 2 exact links, one in Bathgate and one in Margate. A search was then carried out at Peter's old house on the coast and they found a knife with traces of DNA hidden in the attic. However, no other findings were made at the location. Investigators then visited the house where he lived in Margate and established that he was a dangerous serial offender. A search of the house revealed a secret grave in the garden that he had created for his son. Investigators dug up a sand pit in the garden and found the body of a woman. Further searches at the same location uncovered another body. A woman's handbag was found at the crime scene and was collected for DNA analysis. As well as identifying the 2 victims, the handbag was also analyzed. Although the handbag clearly contained DNA, there was no match in the National DNA database. However, on June 1, 2007, investigators found a DNA match to Peter's fingerprints. This was a vital lead and they decided to pursue this line of investigation. On November 14, 2007, the authorities confirmed that one of the bodies was that of Vicky Hamilton, who had gone missing at the age of 15. Her family had waited 16 years for any information about her. They later identified the second body as that of 18-year-old Dinah McNichol, who was hitchhiking home after attending a concert. On September 1, 2008, the Crown Prosecution Service charged Peter with Vicky's murder, leading to his trial. When Vicky's father, Michael, saw Peter, he was restrained by the police, as at that point he just wanted Peter to know that he was there to defend his daughter's honor and remember her. Peter faced sentencing after a month of trial on December 2, 2008, when he was convicted of Vicky's murder and sentenced to life in prison. A year later, in December 2009, Dinah's trial took place. On December 16, due to the defense's failure to provide evidence to exonerate his client, the jury found Peter guilty of Dinah's murder. As a result, he was given an additional life sentence. 5 months before his trial, a report on November 22, 2007, stated that Peter Tobin had been attacked by fellow inmates in prison, but he only suffered minor injuries. During the investigation, Peter Tobin also confessed to a total of 11 murders. Peter died in hospital on October 8, 2022. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Megan Landowski. Megan Landowski lived with her family in Portsmouth, Virginia, a bustling seaport town. Her family included her father, Chris Short, a Navy officer, her mother, Angela, and 2 other siblings. Chris Short had been transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth after a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba. Chris's family felt relieved when they moved there. Megan Landowski, 16 years old, was the oldest in the family. When her family moved, she quickly signed up for dance classes. Megan had a deep passion for dance and showed outstanding talent from the beginning. She started with ballet and then expanded into many different genres. Megan's mother described her as a beautiful, friendly, and talented girl. Megan adapted quickly to her new learning environment at Woodrow Wilson High School. She had an attractive personality and easily made friends with her classmates. Although she attended a prestigious high school that specialized in dance, Megan wanted to attend a regular high school so she could hang out with friends in her neighborhood. She was described as vivacious and kind, with a natural tendency to connect with people. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early to go to school. She chatted with her mother about the upcoming test before going to class. After saying goodbye to Angela, Megan went to school. Angela had no idea that this would be the last time she would see her daughter alive. Megan's school day ended early, and she went home. Angela had told Megan that she expected Megan's call when she got home. Upon arriving, Megan left a voicemail detailing how her day went, reassuring Angela that she had returned safely, and ending by telling Angela she loved her. Then she continued to prepare lunch for herself. However, things took a terrifying and disturbing turn around 4 p.m. Megan's stepfather, Chris, returned home and found the door open. Although he didn't worry at first, he knew Megan had been warned about leaving the door open, so he trusted that she wouldn't leave it unattended like that. He called her name, but there was only silence. When he entered the kitchen, he was faced with a horrifying sight: Megan lying motionless on the floor. Chris quickly called the police and reported the incident. Local detective Doug Funkhauser suddenly received an alarming call reporting the murder of a young girl in town. Immediately, he rushed to the location of the crime, Roberts Court in Portsmouth. When he approached the scene of the crime, he saw horrifying signs. The bloodstains on the door handle were very clear. When he entered the kitchen, he discovered a gruesome scene. The body of a young girl lay on the floor, her body seriously injured. Megan had suffered multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed with tape. For Detective Doug, this case was one of the most brutal cases he had ever investigated. An initial investigation revealed no signs of forced entry. However, a leaf found inside the home matched a bush outside a first-floor window, suggesting that the killer may have entered through that window. In the upstairs bedroom, signs of a struggle were evident on the bed. Megan's underwear was on the floor, and a box of duct tape was found under the left corner of the bed, appearing to match the tape used to bind Megan's hands and face. Forensic experts found blood on the tape and other items, which were collected for further analysis, including pillows, sheets, and blankets. Additional forensic testing indicated that the bedroom was the scene of the sexual assault, as traces of the killer's semen were found on Megan's comforter and underwear. These findings suggested that Megan had been assaulted in the bedroom before the attack downstairs. Megan was found with a large number of injuries, 43 stab wounds, including 11 post-mortem. The forensic team also reported that Megan was naked from the waist down, with her hands bound behind her back with duct tape. The murder weapon was determined to be a missing kitchen knife. Investigators later found the knife in the sink and determined that the initial attack had occurred in the bedroom, but Megan had somehow escaped down the stairs. Investigators discovered that the perpetrator left footprints during the crime and then washed his hands in the kitchen sink. A second knife used in the crime was discovered in a nearby drain. Detectives quickly searched the neighborhood for witnesses, but no one provided any useful information. The killer appeared to have escaped undetected during the day. After the shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly alerted the police to their suspicions regarding the identity of the killer. They suspected an old acquaintance with a troubled past and believed he may be involved in the case. This person is Robert Hickey, a former colleague of Chris's in the Navy who had sexually assaulted Megan when she was 16. Chris and Robert had worked together as technicians and had become close friends, often inviting Robert and his family to their home. Megan's behavior changed dramatically after the abuse. She became withdrawn, and her grades began to decline. Chris noticed the change and asked her what was wrong, but she was initially reluctant to talk about it. Eventually, Megan confided in Chris, revealing that Robert had been sexually assaulting her in secret. Chris was furious and immediately cut off ties with the Hickeys. He also reported the abuse to the authorities. Around the same time, Megan's parents filed a lawsuit against Robert, just 5 months before she was murdered. The trial is pending, and Megan is expected to testify against him. Robert has a lot at stake, including his reputation and his freedom. Megan expressed concern that Robert might try to harm her to prevent her from testifying, and unfortunately, it appears that her fears have come true. When police searched Robert's home, they did not find any direct evidence linking him to Megan's murder. However, upon closer inspection of his computer, they discovered that he had attempted to erase the hard drive. Investigators were able to recover a recently deleted file containing sexually explicit images of minors. This discovery led to Robert being charged with possession of child pornography and becoming the prime suspect in Megan's murder. He was brought in for questioning, and authorities hope that he will confess to the crime. Robert was visibly nervous throughout the interview, but he insisted that he was at the Navy base on the day of Megan's murder. He denied any involvement and claimed he had not left the base. However, after verifying his alibi with his colleagues, the police discovered a gap in his timeline, raising the possibility that he might have been involved in the murder. The police obtained surveillance footage from the base but found no evidence that Robert had left. Despite this, he remained a suspect. To investigate further, a DNA sample was taken from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. The results showed no match, ruling out Robert as the killer. This discovery left the police without any leads or suspects, leaving them frustrated. They then turned their attention to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After taking a DNA sample from Chris, he was quickly cleared. Megan's family members, including her younger brother, Corey, were also ruled out as suspects. The autopsy revealed that the murder was extremely brutal, indicating that the perpetrator had used extreme violence against Megan. Given Megan's popularity and gentle nature, it was difficult to narrow the investigation based on hostile relationships. This made the identity of the killer even more mysterious. The investigation into Megan's case did not produce any suspects. Detectives focused on Megan's life at school and interviewed each of her friends. Megan's best friend was interviewed but did not provide any useful information. Police then spoke to other friends and acquaintances from Woodrow Wilson High School and learned that Megan had dated a few people but nothing too serious. Although these men did not appear to be suspects, police asked them to provide DNA samples as a precaution. Meanwhile, experts retested DNA from the crime scene, which suggested that the killer was likely an African American male. For 6 months, no major developments were made, but that changed when a helpful classmate provided valuable information, a list of boys with whom Megan had occasionally flirted. Police looked through the list and found that they had spoken to all of the boys on the list, except for one, a 17-year-old named Robert Lee Barnes. Megan and Robert Barnes were both in the performing arts program at Churchill High School. Megan confided in her friend that she believed Robert might have a crush on her. At school, Robert was considered an excellent violinist, and as a student, he had always earned good grades, exhibited exemplary behavior, and had no disciplinary problems. As one of Megan's friends, Robert visited Megan's home several times, showing respectful behavior during these visits, and Megan's parents were very fond of him. When the police questioned Robert about Megan, he described her as a kind and pleasant person and was shocked that someone would want to harm her. He mentioned that he and Megan had attended shows together and occasionally hung out. However, towards the end of the interview, Robert's demeanor changed when he was asked to provide a DNA sample. Unlike Megan's other classmates, who were cooperative with the request, Robert hesitated and then refused, which aroused the suspicion of the investigators. Robert said that his mother did not allow the DNA test, but the police informed him that his parents' permission was not required because he was almost 18 years old. However, Robert still refused. This refusal made the investigators feel uncomfortable and suspicious that something was wrong with Robert. Therefore, after the interview ended, the investigators suggested that he talk to his mother and try again. The day after the initial investigation, Robert contacted the authorities to request a meeting. When asked if he had obtained his mother's permission, he replied that he had not, but he had given them a piece of his chewing gum as a DNA sample. Robert removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a rubber glove, and gave it to the investigators. Despite this, the investigators remained suspicious of Robert. The DNA lab then contacted the detective to inquire about the sample's source. After confirming that Robert had indeed placed the gum in the glove, the lab questioned whether he had been continuously monitored while providing the gum. This investigation was prompted by the surprising fact that the DNA on the gum matched that of a woman. It turned out that Robert had switched the gum he was chewing with another piece before handing it to the investigators. On October 23, 2008, Robert was called in for questioning again, this time with his mother. When confronted with the DNA findings, Robert was asked about the chewing gum. He made a critical mistake by stating, "This happened on Thursday." Up until that point, none of the individuals interviewed by the police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When the officers pointed this out to Robert, he provided an implausible explanation. According to Robert, on that Thursday, Megan had asked him to visit her home. Upon his arrival, Robert claimed to have found Megan being held at gunpoint by a masked individual. The alleged attacker held the gun to Robert, forcing him to tie Megan up. Robert then fabricated a story that he had been compelled to sexually assault Megan. He further claimed that they all went downstairs, where the attacker stabbed Megan after obtaining a knife. Ultimately, Robert stated that the attacker had forced him to inflict an injury on himself to ensure his blood would be present at the crime scene. Robert fabricated a false story to portray himself as the victim and to explain away any incriminating evidence. However, the police did not believe his account. When presented with evidence of footprints found at the scene, the investigator asked Robert why only his footprints were found and not those of the person he claimed had attacked him. Robert's mother intervened, telling Robert to stop talking and asserting that Robert was a good and innocent person. The police then took a DNA sample from Robert. The DNA analysis showed a match between Robert's DNA and the DNA found at the crime scene. As a result, Robert Barnes was arrested for the murder of Megan Landowski. According to police, Robert likely broke into the house through a window that afternoon, surprising Megan in her bedroom. He then attacked her, and when she tried to escape downstairs, he chased her, stabbing her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she was dead. After the crime, Robert left the scene and continued his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Robert became unhealthily obsessed with Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Robert's romantic advances were rejected, he turned to coercion, which led to a tragic end. In September 2009, Robert accepted a plea deal that allowed him to be tried as a juvenile, despite having just turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual assault. As a result, Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of the motive behind Robert's actions, whether it was love, lust, bitterness, or the pain of rejection, none of these reasons justify his horrific crimes against the person he claimed to love and care for. Robert chose the path of destruction, taking the life of an innocent person and ruining his own life. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Julie Minogue. Julie Minogue was born on July 19, 1982, in Goshen, New York, a charming town where she was raised by her loving parents, Gerald Minogue and Sandra Barish Doper. She grew up with a sister, Allison Barati Corcoran, and a brother, Peter Gerald Minogue. Throughout her school years, Julie excelled academically at Monroe Woodbury schools, ultimately graduating from Monroe Woodbury High School. She continued her education at Orange County Community College, expanding her knowledge and embracing new experiences. After completing her education, Julie Minogue became a dedicated medical assistant at Coastal Obstetrics and Gynecology in Connecticut. Julie prioritized an active lifestyle, enjoying running and walking to stay energized. She had two sons, Nicholas Keith Turner and Sean Michael Turner. Although the details about her marriage and husband are unknown, she has a strong bond between her and her sons. Julie Minogue found love again in 2017 with Ewan Anthony DeWitt from Roxbury. Together, they welcomed a son, Luke Anthony Minogue, in 2019. However, their relationship eventually fell apart, causing them to divorce. In 2021, she moved into an apartment on Salem Walk in Milford with her sons, putting their happiness first. By 2022, Julie's eldest son, Nicholas, was 21 and had bravely served in the Coast Guard. Her middle son, Sean, was a 17-year-old high school senior. Luke, her youngest son with Ewan, was 3 years old and brought joy to their household. Julie was 40, and life seemed to be going well for her and her 3 boys. However, tragedy struck her family. On the night of December 6, 2022, 17-year-old Sean Minogue was awoken by terrifying screams. At first, he thought the noise was an echo from the neighbor's house, but the crying became louder. Realizing something was terribly wrong, Sean rushed downstairs, concerned for his mother's safety. As he descended into the darkness, he caught a man wielding an axe, and his mother lying on the floor, covered in blood. Amidst the chaos, Sean heard the haunting words, "You didn't believe me," echoing in his mind. Sean quickly ran upstairs, locked his door, and called 911 to report the incident. He placed a chair behind the locked door and opened his window to seek help. Shortly after, he could hear the sound of sirens and people approaching. When he heard the police voice, he mistakenly thought there was an intruder, so he jumped out the window. The officers found the frightened teenager and ensured his safety. Meanwhile, police officers entered the kitchen and discovered Julie Minogue lying on the floor in a pool of blood. Her face and skull had severe cuts. A large axe was found on the stove, indicating the severity of the crime. In the living room, Julie's 3-year-old son Luke was found sitting on the couch, seemingly in shock. He was unresponsive, neither crying nor speaking. An officer stayed with Luke and provided comfort until more police officers arrived at the scene. Following Julie's tragic death, her body was taken to the medical examiner's office for a thorough examination. After a meticulous autopsy, the medical examiner determined that the cause of her death was the severe chopped wounds and impact injuries to her head, torso, and extremities. The detailed findings have provided vital evidence about the attack and the cause of her death. As the police took custody of the evidence they found on the gas stove, they conducted a thorough search of the area to look for any potential evidence that could lead them to the perpetrator. They searched every inch of the house, examining each room for any clues that could shed light on the crime. The investigation attracted the attention of concerned neighbors, who gathered nearby. They was eager to support the investigation in any way they could. A neighbor gave evidence with camera footage from outside his home at the Longmeadow complex. Police have investigated the footage, hoping it will provide vital clues. As they watched, they witnessed a person walking with an axe, closely matching the description Sean had provided. The police then began searching for the identity of the man with the axe. On December 6, 2022, a major breakthrough occurred when a woman called the police to report a phone call she received from her son. With a shaky voice, she shared the shocking revelation that her son had just told her that he had killed his girlfriend. The seriousness of her words prompted an immediate response from law enforcement. They quickly located the woman and engaged her in conversation. During the conversation, police discovered that the man responsible for the disturbing confession was Ewan, a 42-year-old man who had previously been in a relationship with Julie. With this important information, the police made efforts to contact Ewan. However, Ewan abruptly hung up the call. To better understand Ewan's background, the police investigated his history. Ewan was born in 1979 in Roxbury. He had a wide range of interests and pursuits. A skilled athlete, he was passionate about ice hockey and even played in semi-professional leagues. Ewan also holds a bachelor's degree in history from Siena College. Not satisfied with just one career, he also pursued a career as a firefighter, showing his ambition. In 2006, Ewan DeWitt's life took a tumultuous turn when he was arrested in Connecticut for driving under the influence and traffic offenses. After pleading guilty, he was given a suspended prison sentence and placed on probation. However, Ewan turned his life around in 2009 when he enlisted in the U.S. Marine Corps. Over the course of 5 years, he distinguished himself as a skilled weapons specialist and non-commissioned officer, ultimately earning the rank of Lance Corporal. During his time in the Marines, Ewan served as a machine gunner and was part of the elite 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. A notable photo from his time in service shows him bravely operating a .50 caliber machine gun on a vehicle during a defense exercise. Ewan's leadership skills and expertise helped him become captain of the machine gun section. Ewan served multiple tours in combat zones, including Afghanistan and the Middle East, alongside his fellow Marines. His selfless dedication was highlighted in a 2015 article in the Registered Citizen. One notable incident occurred shortly after the birth of his son, when he was arrested for attacking Julie Minogue. According to reports, he threw a large object at her, destroying her phone and preventing her from calling for help. Fearing for her safety, Julie sought refuge at a neighbor's house and contacted the police. In addition, Ewan, while intoxicated, getting into a heated argument with Julie and throwing a playpen at her head, causing a serious injury. Their son witnessed this incident and provided a statement. After Ewan went to rehabilitation, Julie sought a restraining order to protect herself from his abusive behavior. The court granted her a protective order that allowed for limited contact. However, Ewan was still granted visitation rights, which created ongoing concerns for Julie and her family's safety. In addition to their personal struggles, Julie and Ewan became embroiled in a series of family court cases starting in 2021. Julie initiated proceedings by seeking child support for their son Luke. The court ruled in her favor in October 2021, ordering Ewan to provide financial support. Ewan retaliated by taking Julie to court seeking resolution on visitation rights. In an effort to mediate the situation, the court granted supervised visitation, with a further hearing scheduled for April 2023 to revisit the matter. Julie and Ewan's divorce leads to many problems. Just 3 weeks before her death, Julie took action by going to Milford Police Station on November 14, 2022. She filed a complaint against Ewan for allegedly sending her more than 200 text messages in just 2 days, violating a protective order prohibiting him from making contact. Officer Scott Nablin carefully collected evidence of the text messages from Julie Minogue's phone, which further strengthened the case against Ewan. In a statement, Julie expressed deep concern for her safety and the well-being of her children. She stated that she could no longer tolerate the abuse and was seeking protection. Julie detailed the ongoing harassment she had endured and her fear of Ewan's behavior. She mentioned that he had a history of trouble with drugs and alcohol and was worried that he might harm her. In the meantime, Julie Minogue sought a civil restraining order against Ewan. On December 1, 2022, she presented evidence to a judge, including text messages, Ewan's history of substance abuse and mental health issues, and his violent past. Julie expressed concern for Ewan's well-being and emphasized the need for him to receive therapy. She believed Ewan posed a threat to others and should not be allowed to interact with anyone until he received proper treatment. The judge granted Julie a no-contact restraining order on December 1, 2022, to protect her from Ewan. The police investigation focused on Ewan, and they thoroughly searched the area around the Salem Walk condominium. They also visited a dive bar on Ocean Avenue in West Haven, asking patrons for help and providing information about the ongoing investigation. They asked anyone who saw Ewan to contact the authorities. Soon after, witnesses discovered someone resembling Ewan. They immediately alerted the police, who then observed the suspect entering a food truck in a nearby parking lot. Police quickly surrounded the truck and apprehended Ewan without any resistance. During the interrogation, Ewan initially remained silent, but after hours of intense interrogation, he finally confessed to killing Julie with an axe. He admitted to entering her house through the kitchen window, hiding and waiting for her to arrive. When Julie entered the kitchen, Ewan attacked her with an axe. Julie's son, Nicholas, witnessed the terrifying scene as he came downstairs. Frightened, Ewan dropped the axe on the gas stove and fled. The details of the incident, as revealed by Ewan, sent shockwaves through the investigation and provided a disturbing account of the events that occurred that night. During Ewan's first court appearance on December 7, 2022, Assistant State's Attorney Alana Paul updated the judge on the case. She said that Ewan confessed to the crime, but even if he did not, the evidence against him was compelling. Given the severity of the case, Paul argued that a significant sentence was necessary. Judge Odin Grogan set Ewan DeWitt's bond at $5 million due to concerns about his history of ignoring court orders and the need to prioritize public safety. As a result, Ewan was placed under surveillance. A hearing was scheduled for December 14, 2022, to further address the case. On December 14, 2022, Ewan faced multiple charges, including murder, violating a protective order, violating a restraining order, risking injury to a minor, and reckless endangerment. These charges aim to hold Ewan accountable for the full scope of his actions. A hearing for his pending cases was set for April 6, 2023. The family of the victim has released a statement, vowing to take action and hold accountable those who failed to protect their loved one. They hope that this case will lead to improved safeguards for individuals experiencing domestic violence and abuse. The family is committed to creating positive change and preventing similar tragedies from happening in the future. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Rebecca Payne. Rebecca Charlotte Payne was born on April 19, 1986 in New Milford, Connecticut, to Virginia and Nicholas Payne. She grew up as an only child and graduated from New Milford High School in 2004, where she was active in sports, playing field hockey, track, and tennis. After high school, Rebecca pursued a degree in athletic training at Northeastern University in Boston. The 5-year program focused on preventing and treating athletic injuries. During her 4th year, she became a leader on campus, serving on the Dean's Council and as president of the athletic training club. Rebecca was known for her friendly and outgoing personality, making it easy for her to connect with people from all walks of life. She was always willing to lend a helping hand, which earned her many friends. Her life was tragically cut short when she was found dead in May 2008. The news shocked her friends and left them wondering who could have committed such a heinous crime. The police investigation revealed that there were no signs of forced entry at her home, suggesting that Rebecca may have known her killer and possibly let them in voluntarily. Rebecca's apartment, situated on the 3rd floor, consisted of 2 bedrooms. One of these rooms was where Rebecca lay face down on the floor, lifeless. The trail of blood leading from the living room to this bedroom suggested that the attack had occurred in the living room. This theory was later confirmed by forensic experts who found casings at the scene and determined that Rebecca had been shot 5 times. The bloodstains in the apartment indicated that Rebecca was initially conscious and managed to crawl to the bedroom, but her strength eventually gave out. The detective's task was to identify the person responsible for such brutality. They quickly ruled out the possibility of a theft gone wrong, as Rebecca's valuables remained untouched. The apartment was in disarray, with scattered belongings. However, the detectives suspected that the perpetrator intentionally created this mess to mislead them. Alternatively, the mess could have been a result of Rebecca's struggle to resist her attacker. During the investigation, officers noticed that both the balcony door and the front door were open. Furthermore, signs in the 2nd bedroom indicated that someone else had lived there. After speaking with the apartment manager, they discovered Rebecca didn't live alone, but shared an apartment with a fellow student. This new information led the police to search for the student. The police also questioned everyone living in Parker Hill Apartments, trying to find any leads. The attack on Rebecca was loud and brutal, with 5 gunshot wounds. It was surprising that many residents heard a woman screaming and gunshots between 3 and 4 a.m., but none of them called the police. This lack of action is known as the bystander effect, or Genovese syndrome, a psychological phenomenon where individuals are less likely to help a victim when others are present. During the police investigation, a 1st-floor resident reported seeing a black SUV approach the building on the night of the crime, although he couldn't see the license plates or who got out due to the darkness. The apartment complex had security cameras both inside and outside, which may have captured evidence of the crime. Investigating Rebecca's murder, detectives sought CCTV footage from the building to aid their inquiry. They requested the footage from the building manager, but he revealed that the cameras only operated in real time, and recording required a video cassette and manual activation. Unfortunately, no one had recorded the footage. This discovery led investigators to suspect the building manager, who had found Rebecca's body and had unrestricted access to her apartment as a resident of the building. They thought he might have taken advantage of the lack of surveillance to commit the crime, possibly under the cover of darkness. The police explored all avenues, and their suspicions about the manager intensified after a background check revealed his prior issues with the law related to illegal substances. Furthermore, another detail caught the police's attention. During their investigation, the police noticed dark red stains on the front door of the apartment complex manager's apartment. They collected a sample of the stain and sent it to the lab for analysis. Meanwhile, The manager was taken in for questioning at the police station. The investigators asked him numerous questions, trying to determine if he was hiding any information or if his story would change, but he denied any involvement in Rebecca Payne's death. The manager claimed he had spent the entire night in his apartment with his wife, and she corroborated his alibi when questioned by the police. However, the investigation was put on hold until the lab results came back. Once the report confirmed that the stains on the door were just paint, the manager was released due to lack of evidence. While reviewing video and photo evidence from the crime scene, detectives became interested in a specific card used to pay for public transportation in the Boston area. Since each use of the card was recorded in the system, including the location and time of use, the transit police provided the detectives with CCTV footage related to Rebecca's case. After examining the recordings, detectives discovered that the card had been used by Rebecca. Rebecca was walking home, calm and alone, with no one following her, so the initial footage didn't provide any leads in the case. A few days later, investigators obtained another surveillance video from a camera outside the hospital near the Parker Hill apartments. This recording showed a black SUV driving by at the same time as Rebecca's attack, matching the witness's description. Although the footage was poor quality and the license plate was not visible, they were able to identify the car as a Ford. The detectives then brought Rebecca's roommate in for questioning to determine if she had any connection to the incident. The woman was shocked by Rebecca's murder and cooperated with the investigators. She had a solid alibi, having moved in with her parents to study for an exam, which her parents confirmed. Although she was cleared of suspicion, she provided useful information. She revealed that Rebecca's boyfriend, Matt, had access to their apartment. The investigators wondered if Matt had a motive to kill Rebecca and contacted him. Matt claimed he had left Boston to live with his parents in New York State around the time of the attack. Although Matt seemed depressed by his girlfriend's death, the investigators were convinced it was an act. Matt's parents confirmed his alibi, but a phone record showed Matt had spoken to Rebecca on the phone around midnight, just hours before her death. But the investigation into Rebecca's murder hit a dead end after Matt was cleared due to cell tower evidence, placing him at his parents' house in New York State at the time of the crime. Years went by with no leads, leaving Rebecca's parents without answers about their daughter's tragic death. However, a breakthrough came in 2012 when the Boston police arrested Anthony White on drug trafficking charges. With a long prison sentence looming, White offered a deal. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he would reveal crucial details about the night Rebecca died. The investigators saw this as a potential break in the long-dormant case and agreed to the deal. After discussing it with the prosecutor, White recounted that on May 20, 2008, he received a call from Cornell Smith, a fellow drug dealer and acquaintance. Smith wanted to meet up and arrived at the designated location with their mutual friend Michael Balba, who was driving a black SUV. The three of them drove to the Parker Hill apartments, where Balba parked in a spot with a clear view of the apartments. According to White, when Cornell Smith spotted Rebecca through a third-floor window, he exclaimed, "That's her." They waited for a while, watching until the lights in Rebecca's apartment went out, indicating she had likely fallen asleep. Under the cover of darkness, Smith proceeded to climb from the first-floor balcony to the second, and finally to the third, where he entered through the open balcony door. Rebecca was not asleep, but rather lying on the couch in the living room when she encountered the intruder. She began screaming, and a brief struggle followed. Cornell Smith then fired 5 shots at her before fleeing the apartment through the front door and driving away. Investigators were skeptical of White's account, suspecting that he fabricated the story based on news reports to secure a lighter prison sentence. The officers were baffled by the motive behind the murder. Why would Cornell Smith kill Rebecca, who was unrelated to his world? But White's next statement shocked and disturbed them. According to White, Rebecca's death was a case of mistaken identity. On the first floor of the Parker Hill apartments lived two sisters who resembled Rebecca. These sisters, who were also illegal drug dealers, were Smith's rivals. In 2012, Cornell Smith was already serving a 12-year prison sentence for selling drugs, which he had been convicted of 2 years prior. Following White's testimony, Cornell Smith was also charged with Rebecca's murder, but he denied any involvement. Before Cornell Smith's court appearance, prosecutors were dealt a devastating blow. Their key witness, Anthony White, had died in prison. Without White's testimony, the case against Smith was in trouble, as there was no physical evidence linking him to Rebecca Payne's apartment. However, investigators had another lead, Michael Balba, who was in the car with White and Smith on the night of the crime. Detectives located Balba and discovered that he owned a black Ford Expedition SUV, which matched the vehicle caught on surveillance camera and the witness's description. Balba was arrested and taken into custody, but he denied any involvement in the case and requested a lawyer. Despite having no concrete evidence against him, investigators hoped that Balba's connection to the crime could still lead to justice for Rebecca. Investigators examined his court file related to drug trafficking. What they found was astonishing. Smith had written several letters to the judge presiding over his trial, and one of them implicated him in Rebecca's murder. In the letters, Smith portrayed himself as superior to others. Although some of the content was nonsensical, one letter stood out as crucial evidence. In it, Smith wrote about an altercation that had taken place in downtown Boston, which ultimately led to Rebecca Payne's tragic death at his hands, a fact he boldly admitted to, stating, "I, Cornell Allen Smith Sr., was responsible." It's unclear why these letters hadn't raised red flags earlier, especially since they were addressed to the judge. The letter proved that Cornell Smith was in Rebecca Payne's apartment at the time of her murder. The trial took place in 2015. Throughout the trial, the district attorney emphasized that Rebecca was an innocent victim with no connection to Smith or his accomplice, Balba. Payne expressed frustration and sadness, saying that seeing Cornell Smith, the person responsible for his daughter Rebecca's death, is a painful reminder of the tragedy and hinders their ability to move forward. Despite Smith's guilty plea and 18 to 20-year prison sentence, Payne emphasizes that nothing can change the fact that Rebecca is gone forever. The judge ordered Smith to face Rebecca's loved ones, acknowledging the immense pain he caused. Her hometown dedicated a tennis court, garden, and scholarship fund in her name to keep her memory alive. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Elizabeth Arellano. Elizabeth Paula Arellano was born on August 16, 1987, in Fort Worth, Texas, where she spent her entire life. She grew up with her two sisters, Alessandra and Giovanna, and the three were incredibly close. After her biological father left the family when she was very young, her mother, Juanita, remarried a man named Fidel, who adopted Elizabeth and her sisters, treating them as his own. Elizabeth had a warm and loving relationship with her stepfather, who supported her in all her endeavors. She was a diligent student and dreamed of becoming a doctor one day. In high school, she met Rudolph Arellano, who was almost 8 years older than her, and the two began a romantic relationship. Although her parents were initially hesitant about their age difference, they trusted Rudolph and allowed the relationship to continue. At 16, Elizabeth married Rudolph and soon had 4 children, 3 sons, and a daughter. However, she didn't plan to give up her career aspirations to become a full-time mother. She pursued her childhood dream, graduating from medical school and working as a paramedic, with hopes of furthering her education to become a doctor. Elizabeth was a kind and pious woman, raised in a Christian tradition. She was devoted to her children and instilled in them the importance of loving and helping others. Those close to her described her as a caring and responsive person, always willing to lend a helping hand. From the outside, her marriage to Rudolph appeared to be strong and happy, but beneath the surface, it was struggling. Rudolph's jealousy and controlling behavior had been a problem for years, and over time, it became increasingly unbearable. In the spring of 2016, Elizabeth finally reached her breaking point after another jealous outburst from her husband. Taking her children with her, she moved back to her parents' house. Rudolph attempted to reconcile, but Elizabeth was exhausted from tolerating his anger and didn't want her children to witness the constant fighting. So, she found the courage to file for divorce. Shortly after, Elizabeth mysteriously disappeared. According to her friends and family, she had been in good spirits and had decided to go out with colleagues to a local club after work to take her mind off her marital problems. On Friday evening, April 15, 2016, 28-year-old Elizabeth went out with her friends to a fun spot. She had a great time dancing, but didn't drink alcohol because she had driven her car to the club and planned to drive home. After a successful night out, Elizabeth returned home well past midnight on April 16th, parking her car outside her house. She then phoned a friend she had been with at the club to let them know she had arrived home safely. However, despite saying she was home, Elizabeth never actually entered the house. The next morning, her mother Juanita was frantic with worry when she discovered Elizabeth was not at home. She knew her daughter had planned to spend the evening with friends, but she should have been back long before. It wasn't like Elizabeth to disappear without a word, and the fact that her car was parked outside only added to the mystery. Clearly, Elizabeth had returned from the club, but where was she now? When Juanita approached the car, she was shocked to find it unlocked with the key still in the ignition. Her daughter's purse and phone were on the seat, indicating that something was seriously wrong. Juanita immediately called the police to report her daughter, Elizabeth, missing. The police were hopeful they could quickly solve the case, given the leads they had. There was no sign of struggle or blood in the car, suggesting Elizabeth might still be alive. However, to move forward, they needed to piece together a detailed timeline of Elizabeth's movements that evening. To start, the police interviewed Elizabeth's friends and colleagues, who confirmed the time she left their gathering and later spoke with her when she arrived home safely. The police also found several calls and messages from Elizabeth's ex-husband, Rudolph Arellano, on her phone, which showed he had tried contacting her multiple times that night. The police went to Rudolph's house to investigate his whereabouts on the previous evening and night. Rudolph claimed he had spoken to his ex-wife, Elizabeth, the night before, and she had promised to bring their children to him for the weekend. However, she stopped answering his calls, leading him to believe she had changed her mind. The police found Rudolph's alibi suspicious. He said he had been at a local bar with a friend that evening and returned home around midnight. While his friend and other patrons confirmed he was at the bar, no one could verify where he went after leaving. Since Rudolph lived alone, there was no one to confirm he went home, making it difficult for the police to rule him out as a suspect. The police were intrigued by Rudolph's calm demeanor, given that his ex-wife was missing and they were in the process of divorce. Despite being married for many years and Elizabeth being the mother of his children, Rudolph seemed unaffected by her disappearance, which only added to the suspicions surrounding him. On the night a young mother vanished, a fisherman phoned emergency services to report a bizarre event. He was sitting alone on a bridge that spans an interstate highway, fishing, when at around 4:30 a.m., he witnessed a car drive onto the bridge, stop, and then the driver throw a large object, resembling a person, into the water. From his distance, he couldn't see details, but it seemed like something heavy and bulky was tied to the person. The darkness and strong wind on the bridge prevented him from seeing the car's make and number or hearing any sounds. Shortly after, a second witness came forward, who was walking his dog near the bridge. Although he didn't see what happened on the bridge, a distressing scream caught his attention, followed by something large falling from the bridge and a subsequent splash, then silence. Based on the witnesses' accounts, the police decided to investigate the pond near the bridge. A few hours later, divers discovered a body with a large concrete block tied to its neck with a rope. The body of Elizabeth Arellano, a missing woman, was found drowned. A passerby and a fisherman's testimonies helped locate her body, which would have likely gone undiscovered due to the strong tidal currents that prevented it from floating. An initial theory suggested that Elizabeth might have voluntarily ended her life due to family problems. However, this was quickly dismissed as it contradicted the witness account of someone throwing her into the water. Her relatives also confirmed that Elizabeth had big plans for her life and would never abandon her children and parents. The forensic medical results and a man's testimony, who heard Elizabeth's desperate screams as she was thrown off the bridge, revealed that she was still alive when a piece of concrete was tied to her neck. She subsequently suffocated to death. The brutal murder of Elizabeth, a mother of many, has left investigators baffled as to who could have committed such a heinous crime. Robbery has been ruled out as a motive, as none of her belongings were taken. Instead, it's possible that the killer may have stalked her from a club she visited or lay in wait for her at her home. Elizabeth's ex-husband, Rudolph, has denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he was at home sleeping on the night of the murder. However, investigators are not convinced, as he has no alibi and his behavior has raised suspicions. At his ex-wife's funeral, Rudolph appeared grief-stricken, saying he wished he could have died in her place. He even helped set up a charity to raise funds for her farewell ceremony, which seemed to convince his sister of his sincerity. However, when questioned again after the funeral, Rudolph's demeanor had drastically changed, as if nothing had happened. A review of CCTV footage has revealed a new lead. A car similar to Rudolph's was seen leaving Elizabeth's parents' house around 3 a.m. on the night of her murder. The neighbor remembered seeing the car parked near the deceased's house on the road. Similarly, another neighbor saw the car parked nearby. Significantly, it was discovered that the car later drove towards the bridge where the victim was thrown. This detail sparked many questions. When the investigation examined Rudolph's cell phone data for the night of the crime, the questions multiplied. The records showed that he made multiple calls, first near Elizabeth's workplace and then near his in-laws' home. Additionally, he sent several messages to his ex-wife, trying to find out when she would return, but received no response. It appears that he had been tracking her movements and eventually decided to wait for her return at her parents' house. The police gathered sufficient evidence to arrest Rudolph as the main suspect and take him in for further investigation. A crucial witness in the case was Rudolph's eldest son, who shared vital information with the authorities. When shown the rope found around his mother's neck, the boy recalled seeing it in his father's backyard, where he had played with it earlier. Additionally, the boy identified a piece of concrete from their garden, which had appeared after the fence was replaced. Significantly, small fragments of this concrete were discovered in the trunk of Rudolph's car. The investigation revealed that Rudolph had waited for his ex-wife at her parents' home, abducted her, and prevented her from entering the house. Rudolph Arellano kidnapped his ex-wife by forcing her into his car, where he had already prepared rope and concrete in the trunk. He then drove to a bridge, intending to kill her without being noticed. However, his plan was foiled when her body was later recovered from a lake. Arellano was arrested 10 days later, but initially denied any involvement in the crime, claiming he was at home on the night of the murder. Despite the overwhelming evidence and eyewitness testimony against him, Arellano maintained his innocence. However, faced with the possibility of the death penalty, he took his lawyer's advice and confessed to the crime. He cooperated with the investigation in hopes of reducing his sentence. It wasn't until January 2019 that Arellano pleaded guilty in court and provided a detailed account of how he kidnapped and murdered his ex-wife, the mother of their 4 children. The courtroom drama was intense, with Juanita, one of his daughters, fainting upon hearing his confession. His other daughters, Alessandra and Giovanna, were devastated, calling their sister's killer a monster. Rudolph showed no remorse or guilt for his actions, speaking about the murder in a cold and detached manner. He did not apologize or provide a motive for the crime. As a result, he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Despite considering the sentence too lenient, Elizabeth's family chose to forgive Rudolph, as they did not want to be consumed by hatred. Her parents and sisters took on the responsibility of raising Elizabeth's children. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you, the case of Danilo Cavalcante. Danilo Cavalcante was born on July 3, 1989, in Esto, a municipality in the state of Maranhão, Brazil. Unlike many children, he wasn't pampered or comforted with bedtime stories. He didn't have the luxury of being escorted to school at a young age. Instead, he grew up on the streets, a common experience for children in poor Brazilian neighborhoods. The environment in Brazil's favelas was marked by extreme poverty, low living standards, and high unemployment rates. These challenging conditions created a breeding ground for street crime to flourish. When you're exposed to poverty, lack of basic necessities, and violence from a young age, your instincts for self-preservation kick in. People survive by any means necessary. Unfortunately, many individuals who grow up surrounded by violence often resort to similar behavior because it's all they know. The Brando family easily adapted to their new life, enjoying their cozy home and improved lifestyle. Deborah and her sister Sarah were extremely close, not only working together at their cleaning service, but also frequently talking on the phone throughout the day. They had achieved the peaceful and happy life they had moved to another country for. However, a chance encounter would soon alter the course of their lives forever. While spending a day off with her children at the park in 2020, Deborah met Danilo Cavalcante, a 31-year-old fellow countryman. A strong bond quickly formed between them. Danilo was very attentive to Deborah and kind to her children, which made her fall in love with him. She believed she had found a trustworthy and suitable partner. After a few months of dating, they rented a small house and started living together as a family. Initially, everything seemed perfect, but over time, Danilo's hot-tempered and emotional personality began to surface. As his relationship with Deborah deepened, he became increasingly jealous and possessive. Baseless mistrust gradually turned into complete control in their relationship. Scandals erupted repeatedly, leading to violent outbursts. Every night, Dino would get drunk and return home as a completely different, angry person. He demanded total submission from Deborah, punishing her severely in front of the children if she resisted. Despite his abuse, Deborah refused to back down and fought to protect her children. Fed up with the mistreatment, Deborah fled to her sister's home and eventually sought help from the police and the court, obtaining a restraining order to keep Cavalcante away. However, Cavalcante continued to stalk her, threatening violence if she tried to end the relationship permanently. Terrified for her life, Deborah began to investigate Danilo Cavalcante's true identity. By reaching out to acquaintances in Brazil through social media, she uncovered information about his past life and reasons for entering the United States. The truth about her lover's deception left Deborah in shock. On November 5, 2017, Danilo Cavalcante shot and fatally wounded his 20-year-old friend, Walter Jr. Moreira dos Rios in Figueroa, Brazil, over a dispute about a car repair debt. Cavalcante fled the country before authorities could arrest him due to a delay in registering the arrest warrant in the National Warrant Registry. 7 months later, in June 2018, a warrant was issued for his arrest. Cavalcante entered Puerto Rico illegally and obtained a fake ID, eventually settling in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where his sister lived. After Danilo's true identity was revealed, Deborah demanded that he leave her alone, threatening to expose his secret if he refused. However, this ultimatum proved to be a fatal mistake. On the evening of April 18, 2021, Deborah was walking with her children in front of her house, chatting quietly with an elderly neighbor while her kids played nearby. Danilo approached her, and the neighbor, who remained waiting, watched as they conversed calmly. But without warning, Danilo pulled out 2 knives and launched a brutal attack on Deborah. As she fell to the ground, he stabbed her repeatedly. Her terrified children screamed for him to stop, but Danilo was consumed by his own agony. He inflicted a total of 38 stab wounds on Deborah. A horrified neighbor attempted to stem the bleeding and provide emergency aid. Meanwhile, Deborah's daughter rushed to the neighbor's house to call for help and summon emergency services. Deborah Brendo was rushed to PO Hospital, but sadly succumbed to her injuries. Meanwhile, Danilo Cavalcante fled Pennsylvania to evade arrest, remaining at large for several hours until he was eventually apprehended by Virginia State Police. Danilo Cavalcante was extradited to Pennsylvania and arrested in Chester County on August 16, 2023, pending trial for first-degree murder. The investigation revealed that Cavalcante had refused to accept the end of his relationship with Deborah and had subjected her to domestic violence and intimidation since 2020. During the trial, Deborah's child, who was present during the traumatic event, gave emotional testimony, recalling the horrific details of that day. The jury quickly reached a guilty verdict, sentencing Cavalcante to life in prison without parole. After the verdict, Cavalcante was taken to the Chester County Jail in Pocopson, where he awaited transfer to a federal prison. However, on August 31, 2023, at around 9 a.m., he escaped from the jail by climbing up a chimney, using the narrow space between 2 walls in the exercise yard to bypass the barbed wire fences and evade surveillance cameras. Danilo Cavalcante escaped by walking up the roof, running across it, climbing over the fence, and pushing through the barbed wire. This was a surprise, as prison officials thought they had fixed all the weaknesses in the prison system after a previous escape by Igor Bull. They had even added more barbed wire after another inmate, Igor Bolta, escaped a few months earlier. The authorities quickly launched a massive search for Danilo Cavalcante, with alerts going out everywhere. The Pennsylvania State Police Chief gave regular updates to the public through press conferences, asking residents to be vigilant and help track down the escaped prisoner. This strategy worked, and within hours, Danilo Cavalcante was spotted walking along a road about 2 miles west of the prison. On September 2nd, with the help of local residents, authorities used surveillance cameras to spot Cavalcante in the early morning hours. They quickly set up a search perimeter around the area, securing roads and railroads to prevent his escape, and offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to his capture. The initial search focused on a 2-mile radius around the jail in Pocopson Township and Chester County, which is heavily wooded. Just days after the escape, a local resident spotted Cavalcante in a creek bed, but he managed to flee into the woods before police arrived. The search continued, and the perimeter expanded after a week. A security camera then captured Cavalcante on film at Longwood Gardens, a popular botanical garden, nearly 3 miles from the jail and just south of the initial search area. The search team has been bolstered with more personnel and advanced equipment to locate Cavalcante. As part of their efforts, helicopters flew over the search area, broadcasting a recorded plea from Cavalcante's Portuguese-speaking mother, urging him to surrender peacefully. The next morning, a security camera detected Cavalcante on a property approximately 2 miles south of the prison. In response, police established a new perimeter around the facility, Longwood Gardens, and nearby schools, which were closed during the search. As the search entered its 6th day, tension mounted in the community. With a convicted murderer on the loose, locals were anxious for answers about Cavalcante's prison escape. In response, police advised Philadelphia residents in Chester County to take precautions, including locking doors and windows, securing vehicles, and staying indoors. Pennsylvania prisoner Danilo Cavalcante, 34, escaped and sparked a massive manhunt. On September 9th, a crucial breakthrough came when Cavalcante was spotted on a video intercom call at a former colleague's home near Phoenix, about 20 miles outside the original search perimeter. Cavalcante, who who was skilled at altering his appearance, had shaved and changed into new clothes, allowing him to evade detection as he traveled across the state. He stole a van from a dairy store and drove it to Phoenixville, seeking help and shelter from acquaintances. The abandoned van was found the next morning, September 10th, in a field in suburban East with an empty gas tank. As the search continued, the focus shifted to northern Chester County, and authorities updated the search perimeter. On September 11th, Cavalcante was added to the Interpol list, and the reward for information on his whereabouts was increased. That night, a local resident called emergency services to report a burglary at his garage, describing a suspect matching Cavalcante's description. The homeowner defended themselves by shooting the intruder, Cavalcante, 7 times. Despite being injured, Cavalcante managed to flee the scene and steal a .22 caliber rifle with a scope and flashlight from the home. When police arrived, they found Cavalcante's sweatshirt and shoes near the house. After identifying the perpetrator and learning the time he was now armed, police warned residents in the South Coventry neighborhood to secure their properties by locking doors, windows, and vehicles, and to stay indoors if possible for their safety. A breakthrough came around 1 a.m. on September 13th when an aircraft equipped with thermal imaging technology detected Cavalcante in the woods. However, due to poor weather conditions, police had to wait until sunrise to approach the location. Just after midnight, a security alarm went off within the search perimeter, leading authorities to the suspect's location. According to officials, the thermal imaging technology played a crucial role in tracking down Cavalcante, ultimately leading to his capture. On September 13th, around 8 a.m., the police found Danilo Cavalcante, a dangerous criminal, asleep with a stolen rifle. He attempted to flee by crawling into dense undergrowth, but a police dog named Yoda caught him by biting his head and holding him until the police arrived. According to Lieutenant Colonel George Biven, Yoda inflicted minor head injuries on Cavalcante during the capture. Biven explained that the police were able to approach quietly, which gave them the element of surprise, allowing them to capture Cavalcante without anyone getting hurt. Immediately after his capture, Cavalcante was questioned and revealed that he had survived on watermelons and creek water, traveled only at night, and even had a close call with a police officer while hiding. He had planned to steal a car and escape to Canada. Since being returned to prison, Cavalcante has been charged with multiple crimes related to his escape, including burglary, trespassing, and theft. Following Cavalcante's capture, local and state officials, including Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, expressed their gratitude to the numerous law enforcement officers who contributed to the search. Following Cavalcante's escape, the police set up a perimeter several miles in each direction. The Chester County Jail Board, responsible for overseeing the Chester County Jail, faced intense criticism from local residents for failing to prevent Cavalcante's escape. Residents argued that the jail had the opportunity to implement necessary security upgrades after Igor Boll's escape attempt on May 19th, and that these upgrades could have potentially prevented Cavalcante's escape, as he used the same method as Bolta. The prison has taken action against the guard who was on duty during Cavalcante's escape on September 7th, citing that the guard had a clear chance to stop Cavalcante during the escape. Following the recapture of the offender, the Chester County Jail has implemented new security measures, including the installation of a tin roof over the area where Cavalcante climbed up 2 walls to reach the roof and escape. Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro emphasized that Chester County officials need to provide answers regarding the escape, considering the prison's past history. He praised the collective effort of law enforcement agencies and local residents who worked together to apprehend and bring to justice Danilo, the offender who will now face punishment and remain behind bars.